All right. Um, is my audio good? Is my audio good? Because I'm trying to use buds again, and so if the audio is not good, let me know. Or if you can't hear anything, let me know. um, I've been trying to figure out how. Okay, cool. Thanks, Otis. I've been trying to figure out how to like how one would sign up for a podcast and set up emails and do some of that kind of stuff this morning. Good Lord. I hate that stuff. Drives me crazy. I'm not a I know as much tech as I have to be able to operate in life. What up, Chad? Good to see you guys. McMo is here. Anthony's here. Neil's here. Um, I want this to be a little bit of a I wanna I want this to be a positive love story for evangelicalism, even though uh, I no longer practice and participate at an evangelical church. That is my upbringing, that's my backstory, and, what up, Tayo? And, my good friends that are there. There's a lot of people in this little corner that still practice at evangelical churches and worship there, one could say, I guess, and, participate within those. And they have a lot of strengths, but then they just always I tend to found I tend I tended to find that within my experience that they were, um, intellectually fairly shallow, and that's even in the more intellectual traditions. Because I went to, kind of these Baptisty Reformed Gospel Coalition, Together for the Gospel, Young, Restless, and Reformed type world. That was the world that I was in, and I think they pride themselves on being really intellectual about their faith, because there are certain strains of evangelicalism that are known as being anti-intellectual, probably more charismatic type movements, but it's not necessarily universally true because a lot of the churches that I went to, these young restless reformed churches, were also thought of themselves as charismatic or continuationist. I'll try to not make this have yeah, Ligonier for sure. Ligonier. But I mean that's one of my big first forays. McMo post just said that, Ligonier. One of my big forays into philosophy was R.C. Sproul. I mean, back in the day, this is pre Man, I probably maybe I saw it heard it on podcasts. It's hard for me to remember when I was listening to those, but he had I mean, it's almost kind of like a awakening from the meaning crisis thing, but he kinda just went through, uh, to some degree, the history of philosophy. I don't remember where I heard those but, that was kinda my first foray into philosophy, I think, or one of them. So, this is all prompted by, my mother, my dear sweet mother, R.C. Sproul. Uh, yeah. What's wrong with you people? Is that an R.C. Sproul quote, apparently. Um, Also, love to play golf. Lived in Florida, I think. Um, so I want to use this great R.C. Sproul story too. I remember because part of my intellectual awakening, I would say to a large degree, was around the idea of education and thinking about education and um, so another piece of that was um, who's the guy? Moscow, Idaho. What's his name? Douglas Wilson. So he had this classical Association of Classical Christian Schools, and I read his book, Relearning or The Case for Classical Education, I think. And then I was thinking about that with Dorothy Sayers, connected to the Ransom trilogy, because I read the Ransom trilogy, and I read The Abolition of Man, and I realized that was a connection to That Hideous Strength. And I was just really starting to think about education, because that's when my eldest son was going to be starting school. And so I wanted to get a handle on it to Scott Stapp was the only theologian I listened to. So I want to get a handle on it. And at some point in that, I mean, I read Herman Adler's How to Read a Book, which he's a great classic. That book's fantastic. But so I read all these things, and I heard R.C. Sproul say once that he was taking his kids around doing these school tours, and he tells this story where he says, he was going on this school tour, and it was just like over the top. It was just lovely. They had beautiful facilities. They had this, they had that. They went around to classrooms. They did these huge presentations, and they walked around with this group of parents and inquirers of this school. And at the end of the tour guide just kind of said, are there any questions or any comments or anything? And everybody just kind of laughed, because it was so like overwhelming, like who could have a question or a comment about this? Like that was so thorough and just, you know, blew your doors off, that what could anyone possibly say? And R.C. Sproul said he raised his hand. He was in the back of the room, and he said, and I think he just asked the question. I can't remember exactly how he phrased it now, but it was essentially just like, why? Why all this? Why educate? Why do it? Like, what's essentially he was asking, like, what's the goal of education, or why educate? What is the purpose of education? What's, uh, and he said this guy, this tour guide, to his credit, he thought about it, and he kind of looked at him for a while, and he said, "I don't know." I'm pretty sure that's how it went. And R.C. Sproul said, until you can answer that question, I don't want to send my kids here. Now, what's hard about that, I'm thinking about that. I should go find wherever he said that. But I don't know how I'd find it. But what's interesting about that is, like, that's a perfect example of the kind of situation where I would expect someone to give somewhat of a Sunday school answer, like, why are we educating people? I don't know, just like quote the Westminster Confession or something, like, um, to glorify God or something. Or yeah, I don't know, fill in whatever kind of generic platitude you want of, like, what is the goal of education? I don't know, what would a public school educator or a non-Christian, secular, post-Christian, urban monoculture educator say about education, and what is the goal of education? Uh, uh, the thing I love the most, I don't know where I ran across it. Maybe Sarah Hardy shared it with me. Shout out Sarah Hardy. But it's from Simone Weil, I think. It's either her or I think it's her. But it's essentially that the goal. This is a little aside. The goal of education is learning how to pay attention, because I'm sure because it's the goose that lays the golden egg. Because once you learn how to pay attention and you learn discipline, you can pay attention to anything. And so, like, a lot of people will say, math, or I'm never going to use this, or whatever. People who are specifically thinking, and this is why it's hard, is because the typical American, like, let's just create workers and taxpayers, you know, people that create, like, the matrix batteries, people that just pay taxes and are good citizens, that kind of mentality, double A batteries, that kind of mentality is like, well, what's the goal of education? It's not to pay attention. It's to fill a role, to be a cog in the wheel of the machine. Um, but if you learn to pay attention, like in a broad liberal arts classical education, what classical education is supposed to be, you learn how to pay attention, and then you can apply that to anything. You are a lover of learning. You become an autodidact. Whatever you love, you can focus your attention on whatever you love through an operation of the will. You can train yourself to pay attention to things that you wouldn't even naturally pay attention to, because otherwise you're stuck in just kind of the throes of the passions and hedonism. um So yeah, exactly. What did he just say? I wasn't paying attention. So back to the goal of this and uh, Bebbington and the four tenets of evangelicalism. The reason this all came up is so CW actually, who's in my well, somewhat CW. Are you if you're here? Are you in the local estuary? He is. CW is you know CW is like a hard to pin down um, special creature, and so he shows up to estuary sometimes and sometimes not, and he will never confirm with me beforehand. I try to always get him to show up, and sometimes he just doesn't show. But he was there last time, and something that comes up at our estuary. This is part of the inspiration for this, is that I have a good friend, like one of my best local friends, who still goes. He still lives in kind of this evangelical world, like the world that I am no longer a part of. More of the kind of Reformed, Baptisty, evangelical world, and he is a very different personality than me. A wonderful person, or like my good friend Jess is also that way. Jess Proviance, who does all the Job stuff. Uh, they're both still very much in these worlds and love it, and they're comfortable in those worlds and fantastic in those worlds, and that's great. God bless them. But something that can happen sometimes in estuary, there's a lot of people who are de-churched, post-churched. They have a complicated relationship with Christianity, and a lot of them have deconstructed or left churches of some kind of an evangelical stripe. Um, and people that leave the evangelical church are kind of different. I don't know. That's an interesting thought. I never thought of this. I think they're kind of different than people that leave Catholic and Orthodox churches who grew up in that. That's kind of a different thing. I don't know. I don't. That's not a well-formed thought, but and sometimes we just sit around and we can dunk on these evangelical churches. We can on evangelicalism and downplay it and essentially shit talk Calvinism, which is something that I do a lot. Although, again, it's tell me the Calvinism you don't believe in. I maybe don't believe in it either. And I've laid that out before many times, but and I'm inclined and I'm tempted to go into it again. But the particulars of Calvinism that I don't like, but whatever. That's a different conversation. So there are a lot of strengths of evangelicalism that is phenomenal. I want to talk about some of the things that I love. And it came up because CW, geez, I'm all over the place. CW asked me, he brought up these 4 points of evangelicalism, and he just walked me through them and asked me about all of them. And I was just like, no, yeah, I don't like any of that. So let me go look at what it is. I'm navigating away from the screen. The 4 points of Bebbington's evangelicalism are, where are they? What is it? Did I not even open the right page? I didn't. So it is, I opened up this other thing. 'Cause there's two articles from the Gospel Coalition. I think I have them in my oh, good grief. No, I can't even find them in here. Um, yeah, the Enneagram. Well, whatever. Let me see if I can even try them because I won't even remember them. So the four, put them in here if you know them. The four tenets of Beddington's thing, Bebbington, Bebbington Quadrilateral is Googling it. Ligonier Ministries, the first thing that pops up. But anyhow, there's a gospel coalition about it, and it's bullet points. Ligonier, what are you doing? Good grief. Yeah. So the 4 points. First of all, characteristics of the angel, they're committed to the Bible, the authority of the Bible, the distribution of the Bible, the teaching of the Bible. So biblicism, essentially, which is rooted in kind of sola scriptura ideas, which I think has Enlightenment rationalism ties. which rationalism is maybe not even the right word technically. It's maybe like logical positivism. And he said, secondly, evangelicals are cross-centered. So like it's an understanding of salvation as it relates to technically soteriology, how we are saved, cross-centered. And their conversion, they're concerned about conversion. So they have this idea of conversionism, like in or out. It's this either or thing of like, are you saved? There's a lot of things that go into this. It's a very Luther understanding of salvation, saved by grace alone. So it's the works faith dichotomy that doesn't really exist with Catholicism or Orthodoxy, and activism, like political activism. So these are these 4 points of hey Dolly. Biblicism, crucicentrism, conversionism, and activism. Yes. So and CW just walked through all these things because and I don't even know what the context of it was where it came up, but I was like, yeah, I don't affirm any of those things. But I think here's the thing that I never want to go. So there's 2 things I want to bring up is my mother sent me this podcast. I think I brought it up on the Enneagram. That was just like, I mean, it's just like there's a certain tonality. I said this in my last live stream yesterday. There's a certain tone that evangelicals get. It's just a vibe. It's a spirit, and I can just hear it. There's people like Lance. Lance won't care if I bring this up. Lance Cleaver, who's in this little corner. He's been really busy because he's been starting some schools. He's a good friend of mine. But the first time that I met Lance, he popped onto the Discord, the Bridges of Meaning Discord, and we were in a just an audio conversation thing, and there was a bunch of people in there, and he popped in, and he was just like Lance is extroverted, and I was like, gee, this guy, and I just asked him, I'm just like, you are like, what's your story? What's your background? I was just because he was a preacher, man. It's like he is sharing the gospel. He wants to like share the good news, convert people. And listen, this is the thing. Like that's well intended. I was really into Ray Comfort, Kirk Cameron, Way of the Master. I have them all on DVD downstairs. I was pretty active in doing street evangelism back in the day. And the thing, like, it's well intended. It's great. But there's a lot of assumptions that go into it. And the good things come out of it. It's fine. But like, uh, there's a certain tone about people that like I can sense it. It's like I can smell the evangelical on you. And there's a certain tone of people, like people are that way. There are people that are in evangelical churches that aren't that way. But some of them are, and there's something about it that just like it takes me back and just like starts to bug me. I start to get really uncomfortable. It gives me PTSD. And so my mother, I mentioned the Enneagram on one of these live streams, the one that I shared with them, because I mean they're not listening to any of these, and about my dad. And she heard Enneagram and she sent me this. It's in the notes. I think this guy, what's the guy's name? But it's something like popped up in my thing this morning. It was sorry, I'm not very organized because I was distracted trying to figure out podcast stuff before this. But yeah, the Enneagram, Just Thinking podcast on the Enneagram, episode number 125. It is like, if you want an example of exactly what I'm talking about, this kind of the if you want an example of like the epitome of the kind of evangelicalism that drives me crazy, it's that podcast. It is it's just so bad. It's an example of Bulverism to the max. So assume you're right and then argue backwards, which is the opposite of dialogos. It's just like I'm right, but that's part of, but again, that's part of the tenet of conversionism. If you need to convert people to your mode and way of thinking, you have to assume you're right to begin with. And I've had endless conversations like this with my mother and with other evangelical people, and they'll be like, "Well, you just think you're right." Yes, to hold an opinion is to assume, is to like think it's right, but to have the conviction that your opinion is absolutely right and to engage in a dialogue where you're trying to convert the other person rather than learn from the other person and trying to figure out if you could potentially be wrong, those are two diametrically opposed spirits. They're completely different. One is rooted in uh, the assumption that you're right, and the other one is in a spirit of exploration. And I would argue that TLC is very much this mode, because there's been a lot of people that have come into this little corner, Bridges and whatever, that are conversionists, that want to convert everyone to whatever their thing is. And those people they always leave. They end up leaving every time because that's kind of not the game we're playing. But that is a very evangelical thing as a rule, and it's one of the 4 points, even though there are a lot of people within evangelicalism and churches and individuals that don't do that. So let's see what else. So these guys, like, they're just going through the podcast and they're explaining the Enneagram, and they're trying to go into like it's I don't know. And I got into this conversation in the comments the other day with Anselman. Anselman, if you're here, love you. Would love you. I don't, would love your comments and your pushbacks and your criticisms, even if I don't agree with them. Because I don't wanna I never wanna trim the fringes, that's my that's my mode. But Anselman he doesn't like the Enneagram. He doesn't like Christian Hermeticism. He doesn't like a lot of the stuff Grail Country does. He doesn't like anthroposophy. He doesn't like Rudolf Steiner. He doesn't like any of that stuff. And he just says it's non-Christian, or it's anti-Christian, or it's whatever. So it's one thing to assert something. It's another thing to have a conversation about it and try to figure that out. So, and I said to him basically in the comments, like, I don't really care about the origins of the Enneagram. Like, are they're rooted in like occultism? Okay, again, this is like part of this little corner. It's what Chad says with the lightsaber of what do you mean by that? Cutting through bone and marrow, like cutting through the bullshit. What do you mean by occultism? And sometimes when you start to ask these questions, you'll learn people have no idea what they're talking about. Um, and again, it's kind of that answer back to R.C. Sproul. What are you doing education for? What are you doing all this for? I don't know. That's a good answer. If you don't really know something, it's a fine answer to say that I don't know. So like if you ask somebody, okay, let's just for the sake of our origins are in a cool, if I would answer that, I would say my occultism. When I grew up, I equated, and I think this is wrong, also equated the occult with Satanism. Are those two the same things? I think people conflate those and use them the same. I think most broadly in study of the correct knowledge. Okay. Sorry, I'm gonna have to get rid of my AirPods bad. Somehow Luke makes more sense now because I'm talking about my evangelical history. Well, that's the thing, dude. You're never gonna understand anything until you know the person, because what you see and hear depends a lot on where you're standing. It also depends upon the kind of person you are. You can't. I was just having this conversation with my boy Mitch Caps, and he was leaving some comments on a live stream, and he was and I was trying to explain that the person is the nexus and the locus of all meaning. You can't ever divorce the person from the words that they use. You have to understand the words that the person is using in light of the person. That's the connection. You have to. Thank you, Dolly. I appreciate it. And Wayne says, this is why I cannot listen to 99% of evangelical media. Everything is provisional and conditional. Yeah, I have a really hard time with that stuff too. It really takes me back. Like, my mother wanted me to listen to that whole podcast, and I haven't made the whole way through it yet. It was like, I've probably made the way through, I don't know, 30 minutes of it or something. And it was just it's so maddening to me because it's really This is Gutenberg 2.0, right? This is like in Gutenberg, like the Bible, words, it was all constrained by the priestly class, and lay people couldn't engage in this stuff. Nobody was illiterate. You couldn't read your Bible. So you had these siloed, easily controllable things because they had all the knowledge was siloed into the literate class. Well, this is happening with the internet. All these people that are going to churches, that everybody's literate, everybody has books, but again, Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book. There's 4 stages of book reading. He says even in graduate school, most people don't even get beyond the second tier of literacy, which is like, yes, you can sound out words and read words and you have some sense of vocabulary, but there's different levels of reading. Are you asking questions of the text? Are you interacting in the text? Are you looking at the table of contents? Are you really like, there are many, many ways to read a book that can be enriching and good for you. Um, so like this kind of thing, if you go to people who are on YouTube, you're way, way, way beyond the scope of the kind of teachings and control that whatever confessional religion you're in. Because like your church can say like, here's a good example. I was going to bring this up yesterday, but I'll give this example. So I always read widely books that weren't within the approved reading list of these churches that I went to. I read a lot of those books too. You know, I would read like Tim Keller and I don't know if I ever read an R.C. Sproul book. I'd read a lot of these classic Puritan type people. And I would read, sorry, I'm distracted because my son's also here because he's like going to school late and he's running around and I can't think and he's making noise. Maybe I should move. I just can't think. You're distracting me. He's sorry. He's apologetic, but go over here and stare into the sun. Good grief. That's a bad idea too. What should I do? No talking. Yeah, you were. Oh my gosh, this is awkward. I apologize. It's terrible. The audio is probably terrible. Lance, you are here, dude. Ugh. These are all pictures of my family. That's me with long hair right there, and you can't really see it. It's when I had really long, like shoulder length hair. This is cute stuff that my wife does where she puts up all of these pictures of my family all over. But I don't really want you to see your son. Then you go to the sun. You are like a trippy shamanistic Mosaic thinker, Dolly. All right, what was I saying? The example. Oh yeah. So I read widely, but then I would also read books by, and I'm blanking on names because I haven't thought of these in so long. But like, I would read emergent thinkers. I would read Rob Bell books. I would read Blue Like Jazz. I would read A New Kind of Christianity. Who's the guy that wrote that book? I would read Richard Rohr. So I would read all the books. You know, I'd read George MacDonald. But I was also reading like C.S. Lewis, Jerry Bridges. You know, all the D.A. Carson, all the approved books. You know, these are the right books that have the right theology. Thanks, Mitch. And he said audio was good. And so I remember I was reading Rob Bell's first book, Velvet Elvis, and I remember I was going to one of these kind of Baptist-y Reformed churches, and the pastor, it was like serendipity. He brought up this example that Rob Bell uses from Velvet Elvis, and I had just read that section of the book that week. So in Velvet Elvis, Rob uses this illustration of, he says, is faith more like the springs in a trampoline, or like bricks in a wall? So like you're jumping on the trampoline and you can take out some springs, you know, like some propositions of the faith, right? Some things you can doubt some of these springs and remove them. And he's like, but can you keep jumping? Or is it like bricks in the wall where you remove too many and the wall collapses? You no longer have faith. So he's kind of like, he's trying to ask the question of belief and propositions and propositional belief. This is what I've been telling PVK this forever. Rob Bell is a huge influence on me, and he's been talking about this stuff for decades. But
But like John Piper tweeted a while after Rob Bell wrote the book, uh, what is his Universalist book, where he just posits the question, my brain is stupid. Brian McClaren, yes, Brian, thank you, Wayne. Brian McClaren wrote A New Kind of Christianity. Um, but anyhow, Rob Bell's Love Wins. Gosh. So, and then John Piper tweeted famously after Rob released that book, "Farewell, Rob Bell. Like you're outside the camp. You no longer are in." So I'm reading Velvet Elvis, and Rob uses the springs in the trampoline or the bricks in the wall, and he uses as examples, and this is very applicable to like these kind of the Tom Hollands or the Douglas Murrays, the Christian atheists now, the people who acknowledge Christianity but they can't affirm the propositions. He says like, what if one of the springs is like the virgin birth? What if you just can't believe the virgin birth for every reason? Can you keep jumping? Can you keep pursuing your faith? Can you still believe? What does it mean to believe? Rob's always been asking the best questions, and the pastor at this church brings that up, and what he says is that Rob Bell says the virgin birth doesn't matter, and I'm just like, no, he didn't. Rob never says that in the book. He never says the virgin birth doesn't matter. Maybe that's what you heard. What did I say? Being super rude to myself. I don't even know what you're talking about. So like, but that's a perfect example of what it's this siloed. I call it's like mammonistic knowing. This guy, this pastor, knows that Rob Bell is wrong, right? Because John Piper tweeted "Farewell, Rob Bell," and Rob Bell is now outside the camp. So it's this conservative disgust impulse, and so like we need to tell people not to read Rob Bell, and we need to downplay his books. So then he uses an illustration like that, and this is kind of where a little bit it's like cognitive dissonance. It's not cognitive dissonance. It's what's the word for when you want to see something and so you see it? You guys, my brain is yeah, I'm still getting warmed up. I'm struggling so much. Anyhow, he wants Rob Bell to say that the virgin birth doesn't matter. But Rob didn't say that. You're inferring that. And this happened to Rob Bell all the time. There's actually, I don't know if PVK is here or if he'll listen to this or the live stream, but there's like, it's such a terrible example, a shitty example, but there's a guy, who's the guy? On Justin Brierley, a really early episode of Justin Brierley's Unbelievable with Rob Bell, where he's talking to, oh God, who's the guy's hair? It's been so long since I've been out of these. He has really short hair. He's another British guy who's like a Reformed Baptist-y type. And these guys are playing this like apologetics Christian YouTube gotcha game with Rob. And Rob kind of like, fair criticism, fair play. Rob plays that game a little bit where like, and so does Richard Rohr, where he'll turn around and he like, it's the woke anti-woke thing. In coming out of evangelicalism, he'll like go back and criticize it, which is just playing the game of being a Protestant, right? Is it confirmation bias? I thought that's what it was, but that's what everybody thinks it is. So it must be. And that's just such an example. So like back to this podcast on the Enneagram, that's what these guys want to do. The Enneagram is bad. And so they have bulverism and they want to start out just by saying that it's wrong. It's it's well intended, right? Because they're trying to defend the truth, but this is the problem. In their trying to defend the truth, they are practicing anti-truth. It's groupthink. It's Orwellian. It's a kind of authoritarian, intellectual authoritarian totalitarianism, and it's awful. This is why I love long form conversations so much between people who have different perspectives, because Proverbs, every man is right and seems approved until another comes and makes his point, right? If you just live in a silo where all you have is like the one person making the point in the groupthink, you have no contrast over here to discern. If it's just one, there is no discernment. And that's what you have in like siloed groupthink churches, which like just drove me crazy. And I would always try to talk about this spirit within evangelicalism, and I never could, and it drove me crazy. Okay, this is all negative stuff. I said I was going to talk about confabulation. True. Also, yeah, does the truth need defending? It's a good question. I don't think so. Um, so the positive things that I've gotten from my evangelicalism, there was a guy that popped up. Who was that guy? With the Woody truck in Paul's live stream, Rando's live stream the other day, who was just like talking nonstop for like 20 minutes. That guy was lit up. But he's the DJ, that guy. Was that him? No, it was a different guy, Awana. Who brought up Awana? It was the Lutheran cat, the guy from Minnesota who's now in Sweden, whatever his name is. I think he brought up Awana. Somebody brought up Awana. And I grew up with Awana. I grew up with a lot of, one of the things that I love about at least the evangelicalism I grew up in is it loves the Bible. Like Jason Schweizer Almond Tree is a great example of this. That he's just like a Bible dork. Like all he does is read the Bible and Calvin and Hobbes, and I really like that. Okay, here's a pause. So Barandu says, Luke, just a thought. Do you think we could open up live streams with a prayer? Yeah, we could. However, like even that ritual, I, that ritual, I think I'm gonna move back out of the sun because my son is no longer around. Even that ritual gives me struggles. It gives me PTSD because it's that kind of praying where where everything, you open up everything in prayer and you close things in prayer and you say, Lord, Lord, we thank you, and Lord, and you just keep saying Lord over and over and over. A lot of like post-Christians, ex-evangelicals, all those types, they mock that because it's a liturgy, it's a ritual, that evangelical prayer stuff. And I don't, again, like I love the idea of prayer and opening a thing with prayer and having that ritual. Is that a good thing? Yeah, it is. But it's like anything. It can become, once you bring the thing down off the mountain, it can become idolized. Moses breaking the tablets. Is the law good? Yeah, the law is just. 1 Timothy 1:23, I believe it is. One of my favorite verses in the Bible. The law is just if you use it lawfully. And again, that's Vervaeke's adverbial thing. Or like Paul in Romans, where the law increased, the trespass increased. And so, is the law bad? By no means. The law is good. And the law is a school teacher meant to lead you into maturity. But it's kind of it's very much like the trivium: grammar, logic, rhetoric, poetry. You have to learn grammar and logic and the rules to then break the rules. Learning piano, do the scales over and over and over. You have to learn those things. But then to become a truly great pianist, you're not just playing scales anymore, and you're breaking rules, and you're doing faithful innovation, faithful to what has come before, which means that it's not arbitrary. You're not just like going straight French absurdism where you're just like, whatever, it doesn't matter. And like and you start just like banging a pot on the piano. That's not faithful innovation. That's just like saying like everything is arbitrary. It's relative in that it's connected to what came before, but to really innovate, you have to change. You have to break the rules. Faithful to the spirit, but broken to the rule. This is why I love the idea, like a lot of Peter Rollins' works, like the Orthodox heretic. That's what he's saying. Or like I've thought about, and I don't know, people probably won't like this, but like the idea with Abraham, is it sometimes oh man, I can't. Sometimes, in order to remain, it's the fidelity of betrayal, is another like Peter Rollins line. Like Abraham, I don't know. I love these ideas. This is why I love the book Silence. Abraham, go sacrifice your son Isaac. And Abraham went to do that, and God provided a ram, right? And it says Abraham in Hebrews said that he had faith that God would even resurrect Isaac from the dead because God was faithful to his promises, even if I'm destroyed. And this is before the idea of resurrection was even a thing. So, like before, because like now it's easy to say, oh, God just bring him back from the dead. But that's because we live in a post Christian world. Even though, those ideas of resurrection were happening around Second Temple Judaism, or like that was an idea then. But it wasn't early, at least as I understand it, in the early Abrahamic days. And so, like, could Abraham, and I don't like these ideas of counterfactuals, but I'm trying to get to the idea of silence. Could Abraham have just said, like, no, I'm not going to sacrifice Isaac? That's an abhorrent thing. Like, that's my boy, Nate. Nate tends to have that reading and understanding of Abraham and Isaac, is that Abraham couldn't have thought that God wanted him to actually kill Isaac, or else it would have been wrong to do so. But this is why I like the idea, which is a very Hegelian idea of the book Silence, is that there's Father Rodrigo and there's Father Adam Driver, whatever his name is. And I would say that they are both faithful to Christianity, and they do opposite things in regard to apostasy, let's say. The fidelity of betrayal. I think even Christ plays an antichrist. So, faithful innovation sounds Protestant. Well, I mean, I think it's, I think it sounds very Christian. and so, in as much as Protestants are being faithful Christians, I think that's true. But it's not like David Bentley Hart just wrote this book called Tradition and Apocalypse. That's what this is. That's Tradition is the body of the church, or as G.K. Chesterton said, the democracy of the dead, that extends throughout time, that also contains the present, the living and the dead. So there retains that thread all the way back into what has come before, but then that spirit manifests in the now and in the future. I mean, I just think that's what Christianity has to be. Otherwise you're just in this static mode of romantic restorationism, where you're just trying to go back to like the New Testament church or something, which to me is um, impossible and also a bad idea. Um, so aspects of evangelicalism I love. I love their Bible focus, because the Bible's awesome. People should read the Bible a lot. They should memorize the Bible a lot. The Bible is fantastic. I don't advocate sola scriptura because I just think it's really uh, bad philosophy. It's just really bad thinking. But whatever, who cares? Say you believe in sola scriptura and read the Bible a lot. It's a win. Um, what else? I kind of I somewhat miss, even though I love Orthodox liturgy, I do somewhat miss and love. Um, I used to go to a Sovereign Grace churches, these kind of charismatic worship services with music and stuff. I mean, I understand the criticisms of it, um, but I also really enjoyed that in my life and thought it was cool and got a lot of value out of that. I love small group culture. I think small group culture is fantastic if done well. Um, there was a time in my life where I really enjoyed long sermons and really benefited a lot from them. Um, I think you can get stuck in a kind of faux intellectual propositionalism with sermonizing and thinking that's the central meal of a Christian worship service, when that should always be communion. Pause. I gotta go hug my son. Oh, look at Lance showed up. Oh, you don't even have to wait for my link. You just have the power to just jump on it whenever you want. Well, this is good. That's fine that you're on here anyhow, because I feel like I'm even more random and out of my mind than normal.
I jocked you up and up. No, I've been super busy. Wife had a major surgery, lots of stuff going on at work, and so I just have had to focus on real life. But I have been listening to you, Luke. And Paul had a video yesterday where he was kind of dissecting kind of Willow Creek and all this other sort of stuff. So this is the world. I mean, what you're talking is the world I lived in, right? And I came in here with a recovering Bebbington. Because that's when I came in, like you shared the story, you're like, dude, Lance is just evangelicaling all over this voice chat, and it just was driving you nuts, right?
Well, it was, but like that's where I've see, like even that, there's a little bit of growth and maturity, I would say, for myself, because very typically, when I was more wounded and had just fresh from leaving evangelicalism, like I would have been in that space and heard you come in doing your evangelicalizing, and I'd have just been, and I would have said some version like, "Knock it off, shut up." Like this is not the place for your trying to convert everyone. But I think what I did was I was just like, I think I just asked you like your story or what's your deal or like, are you a preacher? I think that's what I asked you.
Yeah. And I said, yeah, it's house church pastoring. And you're like, aha, aha.
Yeah.
Well, and the funny thing that came out of all that, like, so I think all these things is like tying together. And so you've been inside this thing, and this is so, I'm not getting into this Orthodox versus this or whatever. I'm just describing my experience and my story and my journey, right?
Yeah.
And so you and I were reading, like when you said blue like jazz and stuff like I was reading all that stuff too, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I was a seeker, and I'm this weird guy that has this 12-step recovery stuff. But like all this stuff that came out and what we really saw, I see those Bebbington, like this 4 points of whatever stuff like that. It's like this Willow Creek model. And why I took like it to fish to some extent was what I was learning in my business world, PowerPoints, scale, all this kind of the seeker church, which like Paul talked about yesterday, how he kind of recoiled from it. All this stuff was just kind of got baked in, but it felt very natural for me because what I was doing in my work life was all this high leadership, scale, build, draw, attract, all this other sort of stuff. Like that was playing out in evangelicalism in the 90s and the 2000s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and then when you were talking about I'll get to that. And so we had this milieu that we were there, and it felt good. And so my house, the seminar I went to, like he was so much like Paul, and so we were reading all these business leadership books while we were in seminary too, But he had left a mega church because what he was realizing was, and this is very Willow Creekish and everything else. What he put the numbers to it, and he was like, "Wait a minute, we're spending about $1 million per true disciple produced a year." And he was like, "This isn't working." And then he also went out in like 2003, 4, 5. He started telling everyone, "Hey, the church is collapsing in America." And everyone's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "No, it's collapsed in Europe. It's going to collapse here."
Yep.
And so his answer was to go out and do a house church model, which we did, and everything else. And but the one thing that I looked like, even with that, which house church sounds great, but most of the house church movements I've been around have all collapsed too, or had schisms or broke up or whatever. Like that doesn't even solve the problem. And it's it's just as difficult, and all those things come in. And one of the things that you'd mentioned with Gutenberg, which is that technological shift where it put the Bible in the hands of the individual. And I lived by this mantra for 30 years. Me, the Bible, and the Holy Spirit's all I need, right? And the danger to that is having that get untethered from some sense of, the whole like some sense of being bounded to some sense of tradition creates all this stuff that happens, and well-intentioned people go off in all these different weird sort of paradigms.
Yeah. No, I love the house church model, and there are good things about it, but the problem is that it's reliant. What it makes me think of is Peterson said once that we are living in a culture that is basically like when he talked about revivifying the dead father, he's like, we're living on the carcass of this dead whale, this giant whale. And he said, like, eventually the bones will be picked clean and, there won't be anything left. And so you got to revivify things. And that makes me think of, did you see Paul's, what's up, Teo? Did you see Paul's conversation where he played a bunch of that John Mark Comer stuff from yesterday?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Yeah, so that ties into this whole milieu of what's going on.
Is like the point of that I thought was fantastic is he was saying house churches or churches, they're really good at like that first stage of discipleship. And then, but then like there's a point, and this is kind of what I was talking about, even in my own story, it's the same thing. There's a point where if you're wanting to continue to grow and evolve and change and do the kind of stuff that I think TLC is doing, have conversations with people who disagree with you and learn to maybe, like, again, because it's like Rogan will say, I'm not married to my ideas. Like if I am talking to other people and if you learn, change, grow, repent maybe of certain ideas, that's not flip-flopping. That's not a bad thing. That's just maturity and growth. But I think sometimes in order to do that in the cultures that we're talking about, you're forced to leave. You have to like either deconstruct or leave because there's no option. They don't allow for that.
Well, it doesn't afford. Here's where I really think, now that I've spent, over 3 years now in Orthodoxy, and it's different by parish. But here's what I think Protestants in general, but evangelicals, here's what I think they do. They get really great. And then house churches come into this. It's community. Man, if you plug in, you're going to be in a small group, right? You're going to get into service, or you're absolutely going to be out serving with one another, getting outside of yourself. There's discipleship models.
I agree, but the problem with that, like I was saying, is the dead whale. That's based on the remnants of an American culture that has all these, or whatever culture that has this Christian basis, but with technology and cars and suburbs and destination everything, and you don't have city centers anymore. It's city architecture, like even Peugeot will talk about. You'll maybe have like Jess, our good buddy. He has one of those local churches that's phenomenal. That's all local people, and it's a community church. But it's not. It's because it's a community. But like if you lose all that stuff and you live in a very transient culture where people are moving all the time, there's no religio to hold that all together. People think it's the ideas, but it's not. Because like what and then what happens if your ideas change? What's actually holding those people together? Nothing.
Right. So again, I think if anybody's honest about that house church movement, I've seen all these ones, and it's been over 25 years I've watched it. Splits, fall apart, come down. The person who's leading it gets burned out. The other people don't have either the skills or capability, and so it just floats around. Like, it's not a model that sustains very well. Very few people that would find themselves that would do that. And I think the question becomes then, and then again we see all this self-help seeker programming that's going on. Again, PowerPoint church, all this stuff that's happening. Like, they ask, like, what is the church? Maybe you were there when we were asking what that was. I think that was one of your conversations with it is. And the fact is, like, what I see, what's the point of going there is like, you're going there because you're going there to encounter Christ, the presence, right? And in Orthodoxy, even Catholicism, but what you're going there is to participate in the ultimate communion, right? Which is the Eucharist. Yeah. And without the PowerPoints and all the other stuff and everything else, like, it literally is just, you're going to participate in heaven and earth, right? Mediation, angels, all this stuff that's out there. Now, charismatics do a good job, I would say, that sort of thing. Is that, I mean, what they're going to do is they're going there to really encounter they're going to go encounter God in a charismatic service, and they're going to fall out, and they're going to have they're going to speak in tongues, and wave. It's going to be a wild experience.
Sorry, Lance, just want to push back on, ask more questions about what Luke just said about that. The community structure determines whether or not the participation in the church is based around community.
Yeah.
Saying so, like cities, major cities like London, my experience has been quite the opposite. It's that the a lot of it is getting healing from the meaning crisis of loneliness. Like people that are there participating in those type of services, and these are Protestant churches are very evangelical, like heavily influenced by all of the Australian Bethel type of that type of church. They're mostly young people who live in a culture where like Christianity is very much not encouraged, and they find others around the city like them, and they build communities. I think the tweet that PVK referred to in his conversation with, I think it was with John, of the woman that said when before she deconstructed, she would have like 30 people come over to help her move when she was moving. And then after she constructed, no one came over to help her move. I think that's the essence, like Lance was pointing to. Those communities do exist and they do help each other. And I don't know if I don't like whether they're in the city or in the, wherever else. I think just by gathering ritualistically every Sunday, you build a community like where two or more gathered spirits exist, and they come back because they want to cultivate that spirit. Go on, Chad. Sorry, bro. Hi, Dali.
Hello.
Hey, how are you guys?
Hello.
Hey, sorry. Hello.
Your audio's a bit echoey.
Oh man. You fix it.
Yes, exactly, McMo.
The question I have around this is, and maybe it's off topic, so I might be out of line, but I was just wondering, like, as it relates to the Vervaeke, PVK conversation, they kind of touched on some of this stuff and the aspect of community. Like, it's weird. This is such a weird paradox because, like, where do you find community if you can't find a way to submit to a religious body like a church?
Teams.
What did you say, Tom?
I said sport team, football teams in this context.
Oh. Well, yeah. I mean, there's always going to be submission to some religious body, whether it's a book club, a men's group, AA. I mean, that's just you're submitting to whatever structure that is and participating in it. But like, and it's a struggle because, like, I'll admit in Orthodoxy, it's like American Orthodoxy is an interesting beast because, like, people say all the time, there's all these people from my parish that, like, I know lots of guys that grew up. I was just talking to a dad at my kid's school who grew up Orthodox. His grandparents were Orthodox. His parents were Orthodox. He's a Russian guy. He doesn't go to church. He doesn't think of himself as a Christian. So, like, all these, see, that's the thing, is there's a lot of evangelical converts to Orthodoxy because they were leaving the problems of evangelicalism. This is why I like that term, Eastern Rite evangelicalism, that then come to Orthodoxy and they're like, this is the solution.
I don't know if you've seen it. I've not watched it either for a lot of the reasons you mentioned. But Ruslan KDs are one of those evangelical type YouTubers. And he's got a conversation out now with Peugeot and a singer from Paul Robbins. And that's such an interesting pairing because Ruslan grew up Armenian Orthodox. He constructed out of it, and then he's now evangelical. And Peugeot's got the opposite story. So those classes are playing themselves out.
No, absolutely. Because who's our guy in this little corner who he had a randos conversation with Paul, the Egyptian cat. What's his name? Ash. Ash is the same.
Yeah, story. Ash. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's because it's an interesting thing, and I'll talk to these guys because, like, it just baffled this guy's mind. I've known this guy for a long time, and we were just chatting the other day because I'm a convert, so he finds me somewhat fascinating. And he asked me the question. It was kind of cool. He just like, why do you convert? And I was like, well, I mean, basically because the theology I grew up with sucked, and this theology is awesome. and he just, and like, but that to him, like, people that are cradle Orthodox who grew up in it ethnically, Like most of them don't know the theology at all.
Mhm.
They really don't. And then like I say stuff like that, and they're just like, "What are you talking about? Like you're a weirdo." But like that's the thing, is because like I am culturally evangelical. So the things that really excite me, that I get fired up by, are shaped by what formed me, by what I was initiated in. So like now I'll say I'm baptized and chrismated and practice at an Orthodox church, but I think it's very right to say that I'm like, I don't know, and I just do this for fun, but throw percentages on it. Like I'm maybe like still 90%, 95% evangelical,
Mhm.
5% Orthodox. Do I like all the ideas? Sure. But what do I say all the time? My self-identity and liking of ideas has very little to do with who I am.
Well, and I think the scale thing. So one of the things you point out, so Orthodoxy is not, it is not perfection. Like when we think about the people of Orthodoxy and what it is, it's not perfect. And you absolutely see that. So this is your personhood argument, Luke. Like, but this is true, and Paul would say this in evangelicalism and everything else, is that unless the parents are authentically living it in the home and modeling it in the home, right? And I'm not just talking about Bible banging on your kids. I'm talking about authentically living it, right? The good, the bad, the spills, but they see, wow, you're walking the walk, sort of thing. That is what is going to impact kids more. And so for an Orthodox parent, it's, yes, you can catechize the kids and do that stuff so they would learn those things, but really it's the parent that is going to impart orthodoxy to their children, right? By their practices and how they talk, and exposing as they start getting older those things. And so if that's not happening, because there's, and this is there is total cultural orthodoxy going on, secular orthodoxy. Like if you look at, particularly like the Greek church has very low attendance per membership. It's the largest membership, but very low attendance. They're dealing with the same sort of stuff as the evangelical or mainlines or whatever. One of the things that so when I speak about this, like this is not an attack on Protestantism, because Protestantism isn't going away. And I have so many of my amazing friends that are amazing, like look at Paul. Like what's Paul's success? What I see with Paul is he's went to a place and he's built roots and he stayed there, right? And he stayed there. It's vocational too, right? So there's some help from the denomination and allows them to stay there. They had a building that they never would have been able to afford on their own. Like the vocational pastoring, like that is valuable versus all this untethered, start your own church, be a charismatic guy, get a few people around you, you grow to a few thousand. Like that thing doesn't sustain. Plus, it's very dangerous because you get all these weird offshoots of people who really shouldn't be leading a flock, where the vocation provides some ground. But where Paul's authentic and where he works is like he's put himself there in this place. He and his wife have built roots, and he's not going anywhere. And he's going to shepherd and pastor and care for the people that show up to his little corner in Sacramento. Like that's the success. And so people can fall away and come back, but 10, 15 years later, you can show up to Living Stones and guess who's there? Paul Vanderklay and that group of people.
Totally. I have a great Cormac McCarthy quote, but then I want to hear from Neil because you haven't said anything yet.
Okay.
So what you just said reminded me of this. I think through quotes, and Cormac, I mean, come on. We all need more Cormac. So it's long before morning, I knew what I was seeking to discover was a thing I'd always known. That all courage was a form of constancy. That it is always himself that the coward abandoned first. After this, all other betrayals come easily. God, I love Cormac. It's just everything. Okay, Neil.
All right. I guess it's my turn. So there's a lot to talk about. So I'm also Orthodox. So I have two kids who are young, like 5 and 2. And I'm finding it it's super weird to contrast it with my like growing up going to Awana. Because like I just can't I can't imagine an Awana program at an Orthodox church like working. Like the converts who convert really are like allergic to it, and the cradle people are like,
what are you doing?
Why would you bother?
Yeah.
But like, I grew up going to Awana, and I don't have like all the things memorized that I used to, but the phrases will come like every day. I'll just think about something that I memorized
Yeah.
20
Same.
years.
Same.
So on that side, evangelicals are awesome.
No, I totally agree. So
biblicism.
This is what I've been thinking, and I don't know. I want to get your guys' ideas on this. I think American Orthodoxy is somewhat of an oxymoron, because what American Orthodoxy essentially is it's like evangelical Protestant Orthodoxy. I mean, that's what it is. It's culturally evangelical Protestant, because that's American liberal individualistic culture. That's what it is. And America is very Protestant, biblicist, conversionist. Like, what do we think we should do? Like, what is American foreign policy? Like, we need to convert the whole world to, American liberal democracy, to the right politics, right? I mean, they need to be saved by our political systems. So, like, American Orthodoxy is this weird oxymoron that I actually see as, I don't know. And I've said before, I think the evolution of consciousness, although Nathan Woods, my buddy, the other day was saying he doesn't like the idea. It's just like focusing on different patterns or something, because he doesn't think consciousness evolves. But I think the vanguard of human consciousness, or like our becoming as a species, is in the West a little bit, because I just see the fractal reality happening everywhere. Like the fall, you could think of, because this happens like broadly in mankind, but also happens in an individual. Like you're born, and then you have a fall from your mother. You're tethered by a cord, and then you're breastfeeding, and then eventually you stop eating that way and you eat other stuff, and eventually like you leave your family and start another family. That pattern happens in creation. It happens with Adam and Eve, but it's also happening, I think, in our consciousness as it relates to technology, because this isn't completely true. These are large patterns, and there's always exceptions, but like the kind of thing we're talking about with cradle Orthodox, in a way, if you asked a person, they're almost not even individuals. If you ask like a cradle Orthodox, what do you think about some particular doctrine? They don't even, they almost don't even know what you're talking about. Whereas like that's the only thing intellectual evangelicals think about.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think part of that is like a fall from grace. It's just like, what do I think about this separate from what the Bible says, what the church says, what tradition says? What do I think about this? Which is the same thing a kid needs to go through in his own evolution and growth and maturity. Like, it does matter what you think about things. And I don't know. I think we're going to have to figure that out in American Orthodoxy, because it's not the goal for American Orthodoxy is not to make a bunch of Americans like Byzantine Orthodox.
What is the goal?
Faithful innovation, I would say.
Sounds like the Protestant.
Yeah, but I think, so here's the thing, and I agree, right? So the problem, but when you're in liturgy, when you're in Vespers, when you're at the Matins, those sorts of things, there is a timelessness to it, right? And so all those, and I bring it, like all those evangelical sort of, and let's just say American, I'm an American kid, right? Born and raised in America, so I'm a USA American kid, right? I am all those things, but when I go participate in the pattern, when I go participate in the liturgies there, that stuff doesn't exist in those liturgies, right? And the beautiful thing is that the sermon is 10 to 15 minutes long. So you only have that little break, and there's no PowerPoint. So you just have this little break where you get that. So it's this thing that takes you out of all this other milieu, so to speak. But that being said, Luke, what you're saying is exactly true. And Richard Rohr talked about this with Jonathan Pajot at some point when he was talking to American Orthodox was like, hey, quit trying to change anything. Just go there. And in 200 years or so, this thing will work its way out, and whatever American Orthodoxy will become and will be, it will just have happened over a period of time. But I think it's absolutely true, to be honest, as you see, particularly new converts or whatever, like I can't run, I am an evangelical. And so one of the things I used to sound, so this was me before Orthodoxy, and I'm still here and there, which is what I was talking to my Protestant brothers and sisters was, I was like, look at guys, the way we're doing things is not working because people are walking away. The nuns are telling us this is not working. The meaning Christ is telling us this is not working. So the secret church, mega church did not work. It wasn't I mean, it does at the individual level, and there are points of individual transformation. I will never discount that because I've seen it, I've lived it. I'm not saying that, but I'm talking about when we look culturally at that Bebbingtons and all this other stuff, and like Paul recoiled a little bit at that secret church or whatever. We'll be honest, the main line is collapsing. Like if we don't look at ourselves, and so I'm an American Protestant still too, and so are you, Luke, right? You would say, yep, in many ways I am, right? And I lived it and tried to do it. It's like part of it is like trying to figure out what are we doing and how do we do this differently? Because back in the day, for example, like if you would talk to millennials, they would say, we like stained glass. Like we want it to look, we don't want to look like the coffee shop. I can go to a better coffee shop than you have in your church. I can go to a better concert on a Saturday night than you're going to put on a Sunday morning. Like I want the real thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something that's always that infected my mind a while ago was when Jacob accused every Orthodox convert of LARPing. And I've thought about that a lot. You know, like what is it true and is it wrong if it's true? You know, like in a lot of ways, in some ways I am LARPing for sure. Like I'm taking the rules of the game and applying them to my life. But that's just everything. Like everything is a LARP.
Yeah. Well, you can't think your way into a right way of acting, but you can act your way into a right way of thinking. And I think a lot of any sort of discipleship or coming into Christianity is LARPing. Mm-hmm. You act as if you start doing the things that all of a sudden starts transforming you. So I don't like when he says that, I don't push back. Like, yeah, I'm LARPing, but we're all LARPing.
Yeah.
Trying to LARP our way into transformation.
I think a key thing about LARPing though is that it's when you do any role-playing game, like the players are shaping the game as much as the rules are shaping the game. Like, so I think, yes, we are definitely LARPing and everyone else is LARPing, and we are changing how things are going to be done. But I think it is going to take, many, many, many years to figure out what it's going to look like. Because like realistically, I don't have the same models of Orthodoxy as the people who can like take a day trip to Mount Athos. Like that's like, I don't have that. So everything that, I'm getting is from this very local, interpersonal space. Like I try to not do a lot of like the internet Orthodox content. Like it just, I do
very little of it too.
Yeah, it's really not to my taste. But my priest is awesome. And my godfather is awesome. So I can go to the people and learn what they do and do that. And that's going to be different than it was in the first millennium. Like, let's be honest, it's going to be very different. But
I love this thing by Gavin, and then Teo say that, but he says different people at different points along the path will need a different experience to help them with their next step.
That
I
actually
totally agree.
that tracks exactly where I was going, which was to bring back the conversation with John Mark, where he laid out those stages. And I think all three of you definitely, maybe even all four of us, would agree that the evangelical model works up until the third stage. If you go through that individual transformation and you show commitment to a local church, they'll find you something to do, and that will make you a part of the body, so to speak. And then you get to a stage where there's disillusion, some kind of deconstruction, and then we don't know what to do with you. For the three of you, Orthodox has been like the path that you've gone on to find to get onto those next stages. Are you saying that's what every evangelical needs to do, or is there something evangelical churches can do to aid those, the next stage of the evolution?
I think I would say, so I'm a little bit older, so I come from a mainline Methodist church. I think you would look at a lot of the mainline churches. There was a lot more of doxology. There was a rhythm and pattern to the services and some of those things. I do think that there's some tethering around that is good. And there was a question here, which is that brought up, is like, well, how do you know if it's working? Like, is it transforming people? And if it's transforming people, is it transforming the community around it? Right. So that's where you would see. And so from my perspective, when I see if I see something works in a 12-step recovery program, for example, you see a transformed human being who was once one way and is now completely different. And so what does real, like, if we started to see something change in let's just use the United States where we're at, or you started to change in the community, it's all of a sudden you started to see people coming back in real and authentic ways. And so, for example, a lot of things you do, you don't have to understand why they work, you just have to do them. So a lot of that happens in 12-step recovery, but I think that happens also in Christianity or whatever. You just start praying. And liturgical prayers are actually good. Like even in AA, they point people to, hey, why don't you ask for some people some prayers and just start doing them? Well, I don't want to do them. Well, that's okay. I don't believe them. Don't worry. Just do them. And when people will start doing these things, all of a sudden, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 7 years, they have a radical transformation. So I don't think it's realistic. As I sit here, it's not everyone's going to become Orthodox, but I do think it's important to look at in the United States, which is our predominant view, is like, I don't think PowerPoint, business leadership, therapeutic self-help, mega stuff is producing the sorts long-term. Now, will people get drawn to it as a point along the way? But I think it's that larger conversation. I think a lot of evangelicals are, I know I was living it, or having this conversation because they're seeing what's going on and like, wait a minute, something's amiss. How do we do something differently to better impact people? Because again, like, by the way, it's happening out of Orthodoxy too. I'm not trying to say it, but what's happening to all these people deconstructing? Like, listen to the deconstructors, right? And Paul's doing this very well, and that's just who he is. Like, Paul is a thought leader on this, is watching all these deconstructors and, okay, well, how do we respond to this at a church while also not kowtowing to the culture and trying to give them something they think they want, but giving them the crunchy, weird, awesome God that exists.
Neil, any thoughts?
Well, I would say I would not guess that everyone should become Orthodox. I don't think that's probably the right answer. I don't think it's like the inevitable thing for most people. Not that they won't get anything out of it, but that I don't think that the like evangelical church prepares you to become Orthodox. Like, if that's like the framing of the question, I would say no, that is not accurate. But I think what you mostly see is people like having a period of out of the church, and then they need to go back to the church, and they'll usually pick something else. They'll pick a new kind of church. That's what I did, at least. I don't, and I think Orthodoxy is like just, it's in the zeitgeist in a way that the Orthodox didn't really expect. And we'll see how they handle it, and how we handle it, I guess. I'm in there now. So, but I think something that the evangelical church could do to not, if they wanted to not have people become Orthodox or become nuns, is encourage contemplative practice for its own sake, instead of for the sake of improving yourself. I think that's like, if you get like, you should do contemplative practice at all. In my experience, it came out of like, you're doing it so that you can be better at like in your own life. But I think doing it like the spiritual practices that I like have adopted, I didn't adopt because they've made me better at my job, or better at being a husband even, or better at being a person. Like, none of that. I like experience God, and that's how. And I can't not like stay doing that. But I think from my experience, the whole like experience God thing was like the worship service. And then the other things were more for like improving yourself and like getting ready for the next mission trip you were going to go on, or to be able to be a better witness, or so that like in times of struggle you had something to lean on, all these reasons. And none of it was like so that you can be like in the presence of God.
And I think for me, I think the practices are important. And so, for example, 12-step recovery programs will get you into a mode of action and being in practices which are intended to then transform you. And some of those practices revolve around, there is self-reflection, seeing the patterns of your life. But then there's a lot of forgiveness and reconciliation that's going on with respect to that kind of this path, sought through prayer and meditation to prove our conscious contact with God. Think about that, and that's in a step in prayer and meditation. It's this sense of this. It's a set of practices. I think what I have seen throughout my life, and it's a constant thread. I've seen it. This would go across Orthodoxy, any sort of Protestantism, Catholicism, or whatever. But the men and women that I know that have a practice of getting up in their life in the morning and spending time in some contemplation, and I mean prayer and meditation, the quiet, the stillness, those sorts of things that you see that to capture that, and then taking that out and then applying that, walking that out in their life, living a life of love of neighbor and service and sacrifice, those sorts of things, being quick to apologize and amend within the day, like these sorts of things that happen. The men and women that I've seen that are the ones that have that light. They're the character that attracts people to them, which ultimately, what are people being attracted to? It's the Christ in them, right? So I think less than your theology or the programs you have and all these other sorts of things. And I know that like that's a very unattractive like thing. Like, it's not, maybe that stuff maybe not build a mega church, but those are the things that transform.
So I want to engage with what Paul's saying here. So he says, do you do contemplative practice for theosis? That's pretty much Peugeot's pitch. And then he says, part of theosis chasing is parallel to the manosphere wisdom maxing hunt. And he says, I'm not criticizing it. I just think to be honest about it doesn't help. So So I want to read a quote here. I don't even want to tell people what it's from in response to that and in my answer to that, and then do some comments. But so, without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God. Our wisdom, insofar as it ought to be deemed true and solid wisdom, consists almost entirely of two parts, the knowledge of God and of ourselves. But as these are connected by many ties, it is not easy to determine which of the two precedes and gives birth to the other. So what I would say, I'm not a evangelical in the sense of thinking people should convert to Orthodoxy. I sometimes doubt, and have said before, of whether or not I should have converted to Orthodoxy. Because in as much as I have accurate self-awareness, the reason I converted to Orthodoxy was because I like the theology more. I thought it was the way that they intellectually articulate things of the faith, to me, is more consistent, because by nature, Orthodoxy is apophatic, more so than cataphatic. It is a right-brained religion. The right brain is the master in Orthodox theology. That's just how it is. So I like all of that stuff. I think it's a way to be intellectually consistent. However, that's just me. And also at the same time, I don't think through your ego and your will, you can just pick what you believe, because I don't think belief works that way. That's why I say I'm 95% evangelical. I've been initiated in evangelicalism. I can't all of a sudden just become Orthodox. And I don't think it's the debate of well, what's the strength? Is it the Bible, or is it liturgy, or is it the Eucharist? Those distinctions between Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant. To me, that's all trying to game faith, which can't be done. So I don't think and this goes back to Gavin's comment, I think people need different things at different points in their life, and it's my big gospel all the time. It's personal. It's always personal and depends on the person. You can be right and be wrong, or be wrong and be right. But contemplative practice, the inward journey, I think, where you're looking for, I don't know, what's his name? Somebody made a great comment on the way that I was describing authenticity is more integrity, which is probably true, but it's just being honest with yourself. People in whatever stage they are and wherever they are need to be honest with themselves. I don't think that that's going to end up with everybody converting to Orthodoxy. I think the church, I believe in these absolute generics that then become particular, like Christ, the church. But in my video of the church is just whatever is living and transforming into proper being. That just is the church, in my understanding. And so and it's very much the Hegelian idea, or the Christologic idea of Maximus that Jordan Daniel Wood always talks about, the identity of identity and non-identity. Do I believe the Orthodox Church is the church? Yes. Christ is found there and not there.
Yeah.
So people are going to do whatever they're going to do. That quote, by the way, is Calvin. So sometimes I feel like a failure for converting to Orthodoxy, because I just feel like if I was capable of being who I should have been within my evangelical churches, I wouldn't have had to leave. I could have maintained the religio that was there, but I couldn't do it. I was too, I don't know. I think I'm too intellectually wired, and what I saw as the log in our eye and our intellectual inconsistencies and groupthink drove me crazy. And I kept wanting to talk about it, and nobody was willing to talk about it. And I was just like, how can we ever intellectually repent then?
Yeah.
It just drove me nuts.
I think that's where I've got alignment with you, Luke. We've got savings throws. But before we get to that really quickly, yeah, I've got a lot of alignment with you there, because a lot of Christian YouTube content, let's stick to the medium that we're on, is based around that. There are lines that you can't go past. Alan Parr. There are certain Mike Winger, certain famous figures that all talk to each other and all check each other's, doctrine and theology to make sure that it's all aligned. And then you have debates with people that don't agree with you, and it's all very propositional based. So yeah, I agree with you on that front. But I also think, I always think back to PVK's video about the simple faith people, the people that aren't as intellectually curious as you and I might be, the ones that just really just deal with the Jesus that they know, Jesus in their heart. Paul's got that fantastic story about the woman that gets given a rose and gives to someone else. So I think those are the people we all should be aspiring to be more like. And a lot of us can get into our individualism, say, oh, this doesn't fit in with the way I see the world, and therefore I'll go on a spiritual quest to find the one that fits, and then you get in like, oh, this also doesn't fit, and so on and so on. Grizz, we need some saving throws. How are you doing, bro?
You absolutely do. You absolutely do. I am having a banger of a day, Tail. A banger of a day. But I'll give some bonus savings throws because this is Grail country, the hallway of Grail country. I tuned in just a moment ago, and it was something about talking about the light that attracts people to people is really Jesus, and whatnot. And then Luke went on for about 20 minutes, and I took notes for that. But first, I have to say, is that a mime shirt, bro?
I don't think so. It's just a stripe.
I swear I've seen mimes wear that outfit.
Mimes and the French.
Back up again and then flex so we can see what all those push-ups do for a man.
No.
And when Luke was talking in there, he said I couldn't maintain the religio, and that reminded me from the bit of what you call it, Pastor Paul's home. No, his top secret, give me money conversation with Jean Vervaeke has this part in it where they talk about where, much like Pajot has done, Vervaeke disclaims this ain't no community, and then he said it's a dojo, guys, but we're definitely not a community because that comes with so many legal liabilities from all the crazy people you attract on the internet. Now the savings throws. As you know, you choose between survival, social, wisdom, and heart. And if it's over 10, you take half damage from the mind control that you've already survived. And if it's under 10, you take full damage. But remember, Embody, over at my show, we want what's best for you. Survival, social, wisdom, or heart. Choose. Survivalist with a nat 1. You're all gonna die. I mean, you take full damage from the mind control. Lovers of wisdom. 13. You also wait. No, you made it. Half damage for you. That's a Baker's Coven. Socialists. No, that was socialist. I got the Baker's Coven. Sorry, guys. Lovers of wisdom got an 11. And hard folks. Well, that's a 14. A 14. Indigo kids, nat 1 also. Obviously.
Hey, don't they get to see the die on a nat 1?
Oh, they do. It's better when it's a nat 20 because you can see the beholder in it. But they do.
Nice catch, Neil.
What is that when you make sure the priest doesn't mess up? There it is. That's the nat 1. There's a beholder in there.
No, you just came for the savings throws. You don't have thoughts?
No. I have very inspired thoughts. But first, by the power of StreamYards, which you can find a referral link at the bottom of my whatnots, man of my dreams, I can cast this also to my channel, as anyone else who has StreamYards and has a channel can do, and I'm going to do so. This is the story called Man of My Dreams, and it was evoked. It was evoked within me while watching the moments of this wonderful stream prior to my appearance. Once upon a time, some lady told me that I showed up in her dream. and she had dreamt that she was in a bar and stepped to the side. What? Why are you whistling and making a private jet?
No, this isn't a private chat. I'm just responding. I'm socializing with your story. I'm resonating. That's what the whistles.
I think that we should quit the foreplay and just do me and you show that everybody loves more than anything. Man of my dreams. This lady had a dream and she was in a bar. And I appeared somehow in this dream, but I wasn't in the bar. She went to the code room, and I was in the code room of the bar, and there was a gay orgy happening in the code room of the bar. And I was sitting at the back of the code room in a chair, seemingly like passed out like this.
I don't know how to do any of this.
There you go. There you go. I was in the back of the room being filleted, and all this gay stuff was happening. And I kind of woke up and I saw her over there, and I went and gave her a hug, and it was awkward for her because there's a status a man is in while he's being filleted before he's done being filleted, and the hug was very awkward because of that status. And when I was listening to Luke go on, and he said both apophatic and kapophatic in the same section, or whatever the thing, it really reminded me of what the parts of the corner that aren't my parts of the corner are doing, and that I think is intellectually the coat room dream, and those are my thoughts. Those are my thoughts. Now you either have to take me smaller or I'm leaving.
I will take you smaller.
Thank you.
Or someone will. Lance will. Lance knows what he's doing. Yeah. Well, Grim, you're still somewhat of a mystery to me, which is why I find you interesting. I'm always attracted to people that are enigmatic to me that I can't figure out right away. And
well, I hate to interrupt, but today's stream, Axiomatic Lanterns, which starts in about an hour and 10 minutes, I'm going to really I'm going to invoke some confessionalism within myself and tell the tale, as it were, the Rando's conversation that Paul didn't have with me will be today's stream. So be sure for it, and then you'll find out more.
dang.
Oh, and the master of cross promotion.
You can order this Lobster Monkey shirt, and the links below a lot of the videos.
Look at Grim. Look at what you did. After you talked, Paul had to go clean his ears out.
He had to go write things down and prepare his sermon. That was But this
I don't think that story is going to make its way into the Stone Sunday sermon.
This shirt will be making an appearance in the VIP lounge of the Symbolic World Summit, thanks to people like you. Several of you, actually, right now, literally, are sending me to the Symbolic World Summit, where this shirt will make an appearance. Show up in yours for an extra bonus to your savings.
Oh, man. Marlon B. Randos? I don't even know what this means. Way too rough even for the rough draft.
No, I want to go back up to, I think this is really good. There's a lot of stuff that came out. Let's come here. Paul talked about this thing about theosis being kind of the parallel to wisdom maxing. And I think a lot of things we're seeing online are people wanting to, and this is, I fall prey to this, is wanting to learn things so they can, talk about things and, grab knowledge or whatever. And I think, like, to me, this is like really important, is seeking God's presence. And Evagrius Ponticus, Jess and I read this book. It was awesome. But he really talked about what is he talks about practice. Praxis leads to gnosis, which is knowledge of God, which is given from God. And he talks about that ultimately, once you get on this path, like if you're on the path, you're turned into a true contemplative. Yep.
I'm sorry, but that bit about like practice leads to gnosis. Gnosis? What am I, some kind of Gnostic? Practice leads to gnosis. And there's this whole Buddhist thing of I shall not want, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like metaphysically, the reason not to want is because you're like vibrating at the frequency of lack. So like when you pray to God, if you pray like, please take this away from me, you're like vibrating to the universe. I still have it. I have this. I have this. This is what I'm reflect this back to me. And so that's why you were supposed to pray in gratitude. Hey, Hezzy. It sounded like children applauded as you came on. That was great. But the practice leads to gnosis. Is like if you're seeking the light of God, you're saying, I don't have the light of God. But if you hop on a live stream and shine it on people, then like you have it. That's the gnosis. Maybe.
One of the things that Evangelical Rituals wanted to take back gnosis from the Gnostics, right? Because gnosis just means knowledge of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is this ascent, right? And so contemplative. And the other thing about a true contemplative is it's like once one mystery is kind of unfolded to you, something is enfolded. And all of this Evagrius Ponticus, in this book that Jess and I read, was all within the context of a spiritual father, right? And some guidance. And they're talking about like when the student is ready, then the teacher will appear, those sorts of things. So there is a boundedness around it. It's not just running off and doing anything you want. But I do think there's a very big difference between contemplation versus knowledge seeking or wisdom seeking. And a true contemplative is always kind of always open to more will be revealed. And and I think to me, like that's a big difference versus trying to get the right set of facts and confessions and knowledge and this and that, so I can destroy you with facts and logic on some debate, whether it be Orthodoxy or Protestant, whatever. Like that's just silly and stupid. That's not the personal transformation. And I think, I think again, why do I do what I do? So people would ask, well, why am I ended up finding my way in the Orthodox thing? Why am I practicing that now? Is I found that those practices meld well with my 12-step practices, and it's more about things that I can actually participate in and do, and not thinky-talky.
Mm-hmm.
And so I use the simple words like, do things work? Like, am I being transformed? If I'm not being transformed, then it's not making me a better husband, a better dad, a better person around, then what the hell, why am I wasting my time? I'd rather just go smoke weed and snort coke,
It's what you do.
I mean, seriously, like that's my default. Like that's what I want to do. Like who I am as an addict and alcoholic, all I really want to do is smoke weed and snort coke. But I can't do that because that destroys me and others.
Well, only if you don't use it with the proper setting.
Let's let Chezi, what do you got?
How would you gauge? First of all, I hope everyone's doing well. How would you gauge the transformation, though? Lance, like you're saying, I don't want it to just be thinky-talky. You also said that, like, when the student is ready, the master will appear. So you could say at some point during the thinky-talky, transformation begins, right? But like, is your assumption that from the first day you're interacting, you're then going to feel the transformation? Or is there a gray period where you have to be in that thinky-talky until said transformation could happen?
Well, I would just say, how can I see? So when I say when do I see those things, right? And so I can see it in other people's, and sometimes I see it myself. So where do I see spiritual transformation or practice or principles? It's people that can react. So, for example, I have seen people that will lose a child, or just these horrible, horrific things will happen in their lives, and they will be able to handle those things with a grace about themselves that is amazing. You'll see them be able to handle life in a way that, so all of a sudden you're like, I want some of what that person has, right? And so I think it's like the definition of pornography in that great Supreme Court case. You know it when you see it. And so I think we seek those sorts of people. So for me, I seek out in my life men or women that have something that I want. And a lot of that is, how I see they live and move and have their being, right? And so I think transfer, you can see that thing. And so I think you can see, particularly people that you're close and you're walking a journey with them, you can see they were once this way, thinking this way, acting this way, doing these things. And now where life used to baffle them and they couldn't have good relationships and they couldn't hold down a job, or I'm just using examples, all of a sudden, all that stuff has changed for them.
I would just say then, and this relates in a certain sense also to a conversation, a podcast that Luke brought up a few weeks ago with Theo Vaughn. I can't remember what the MMA name of the name of the person he was talking to. This MMA fighter that
John Strickland.
Yeah, so he like sort of really exposed himself and opened up, broke down, started crying. Now, there's a sense, Lance, that at a certain point of one's development, they don't yet know how to discern between what's true and what's not true. And, this could be in a space where there's sneaky talky. It's a place where you could see, it allows you to see someone express himself and be vulnerable and open up. It allows you to be in a space where you get to discern what the main point of the conversation is and what's the periphery. How do I stay on topic? And, there needs to be room for someone to first practice that. So then in the quote unquote real world, they could start actually making judgments and decide for themselves, is this the person I'm looking up to? Is this the kind of transformation I want to have? But in order to do so, I think it still requires, and specifically to the age that, that a lot of us are, or many of us in this corner, we're alone. And the ideas of the virtually not alone is to practice in a conversation like this, when not to interrupt, when to add. And I think that's you're right that you can't be lost in this place, but I think that this is a place that arms you with the proper tools to perform said transformation.
Well, and I think this place works. So I would say this is how this works in the corner. I've got two people here right now, Sherry and Luke. When Luke was making fun of me, rightfully so, I own it, that I was being this total evangelical about penal substitutionary atonement and a voice chat. Sherry asked me a very, not mean, but a very direct and pointed question about that. And it jarred me a bit and set me down a path to kind of actually looking into what I was spouting off, and set me down this whole different sort of deal. So I would also say that within this space here, there is a lot of practical stuff. There are people that are meeting offline that are learning how to do practices. Like, I think Gavin's story is amazing. Chad asked him if he'd be willing to get up in the morning and pray with him. Gavin said, well, sure, I'll show up, and didn't know what to do. There was some accountability there. They started practicing some spiritual practices together. And now everyone's heard kind of Gavin's story. I don't want to steal the thunder. There's a lot of, I think, people saying, I want what this person has. I find myself in some sort of community with them. And people are taking the thinky talky out of here and putting practices in their life. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things Jordan Peterson did, is he got young men into doing some practices, right? And changing some things, and it radically started to change their lives.
All right, Sherry, you got some?
I just thought I'd show up here because I want people to know that this is not an ortho grove sphere. There are ortho women.
That's always, I find.
Oh,
what is going on? Oh, I find often, Sherry, that people who drop those comments in, I mean, it is predominantly male, the people that are participating, but the people who leave those kinds of comments, like, where are the women? If you were part of the community, you'd know where they are. I know where they all are.
Yeah. When I had my conversation with Martin Shaw, he said something to me there. He said he was curious why I, as a woman, would be attracted to a space where it looked like a lot of bearded men dressed in black. And I never said this to him at the time, mostly because I was so nervous during that whole conversation. But actually, I never saw Orthodoxy that way. When I've put it this way, when I look into a Protestant church, it looks like a man decorated it. And when I look into an Orthodox church, it looks like a woman decorated it.
Very true.
And for me, the Orthodox Church was the most feminine space that I have ever been in as a Christian. So there you go, guys. Have fun. Have fun with that.
Well, Sherry, that reminds me of Tyler, back in the day, Tyler Anderson's comment that most modern day church, and by that I think he means Protestant evangelicalism, is a masculine space with feminine language, while the church should be a feminine space with masculine language.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've had a number of priests tell me that the person they fear the most outside of God are the elder women in the church.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to point to, I don't know who brought it up, but the yet to be released PVK John Bevicki conversation that talks about the Silk Road and compares that with the old way in the C.S. Lewis Mere Christianity. And this right here for me is a good example of what that is, because I would describe myself as someone that's just walking up and down the Silk Road and, poking into each door, seeing what's going on, but not really feeling drawn into any room quite yet. But in this space, I can listen and speak to people who have also done the same thing and found a place that's comfortable, at least for now. And I can listen to how they feel about the space they're in.
That's why I've been constantly bringing up different practices, asking people what their practices are, being that John Bevicki is always bringing up ecology of practices, and though I don't really hear a lot of people explicitly share them. So I think it's good that we share more of that stuff, guys.
Yeah.
Also,
I also wanted to just talk about theosis for a minute, because I'm afraid that word is misunderstood. Theosis is the cleaving unto God, right? And of course, there's hesychastic practices which none of us could probably do because we just don't have time to do that.
Yeah.
We don't live in a monastery, and our lives aren't dedicated to, hesychasm. But theosis is what every Christian, regardless of their denomination, is moving towards. That's what theosis is. It's not an experience. It's not a mystical experience. It's becoming one with God, and I mean, hopefully, we all understand our spirituality as Christians as having that telos, right? Yeah. So I just want to make that point, because I think people grab onto certain words and misunderstand them, and then in the course of that action misuse them. So
yeah, and I think what you talked about, like you're on this path, and I think knowing enough about Sherry or whatever, when I was talking about that Evagrius Ponticus, he was talking about trying to get to pure prayer, spiritual prayer, or contemplation. He describes it, it's a journey, right? So it's a journey. We're walking through it, we're going through it, and it's an ascent to God. And so, like and I think a lot of people have talked about in here, like we have all these places and you push on these doors, and at some point you're going to poke your head in, at some point you're going to actually walk into one of those doors, and that's good. And you're going to go hang out in there, right? And then that may be good for a period of time, but then maybe you'll realize that's not the room for you. And so then you'll go back out and you'll get on the path again and you'll push some doors and do some things there. But I think this all is, no matter where we're at, as we are on this journey. And I think ultimately where I'm at, being an apokatastasis guy, is I think we're all back on a journey to be gathering back into the oneness with the Father. While then we'll maintain our multiplicity, but I think we're all on a journey home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think too, something that I think people need to remember, because I think it's true, if Christ is both non-dual, so the identity of identity and non-identity, there is no place that he doesn't manifest, because that's that Maximus Ambiguum quote, which is something like, the will of God the will of God wills in all things and at all times to manifest Christ in all places and all times, essentially. And so that's like even in death, even in the depths where you think you won't find him, the harrowing of hell, even in the darkness, because the chaos in the darkness is just an order that you can't discern, a mystical order. But that's the same with the church. The church is both, which is what my understanding of the Orthodox understanding of the church is that it's the same thing. The church is both, so the Orthodox would say this is the church, but that doesn't mean that the church is not here at the same time.
Now and not yet.
What's that?
Now and not yet.
Yeah. So it's an affirmation, but not necessarily an either or exclusivist thing. That's kind of why I've been talking about that exclusion for inclusion. I mean, you need exclusion because that's what allows boundaries and difference in bodies, discernment, differentiation, period. You have to have it, but that doesn't mean that you have it in kind of an either or way, which is why I love that understanding of the church that the deacon at my church was teaching out of Ephesians 1. It's a calling out of non-being. That's what the church is. It's not an election. It's an election of non-being into being. Mm-hmm. It's not a choice between two created things. That understanding of election is evil.
Let me run this by you. This is something I've been thinking about based on your stream yesterday, Luke, and PVK's last few videos about. So I think one of the clear criticism that I agree with people leaving the evangelical churches can be something like it's not wild enough. It's not as wild as Christianity could and should be. Yeah. And there's a wildness that people are seeking that's not I wouldn't say it's not there, but it's not fronted in evangelical circles. At the same time, I've been thinking about secularity, and it's just how secularity is a sister of the Protestant church, and how secularity can sort of be used as a tool to reel out the Protestant ethos, so to speak. So I think Protestants like the edge of Christendom, so to speak. Mm-hmm. It's the fringe. So there will be some. We will have affirming churches. We'll have churches that go full on BLM becomes their thing. Like that's. I think that's a feature, not a bug, so to speak, because we have to work out of all these ideas, and some die off, and some sprout up new things. And I think the evangelical Protestants movement can be a place where can sort of serve as people that have planted their flag in the old way to say, this is where we're going to welcome everyone and have conversations, which brings in the third thing, which is the estuary, and the estuary being linked to our church and being a place where like a gateway drug for conversation. And if you go deep enough, you might go into a Protestant church. And if you go to the Protestant church, you might get to the third stage, and at some point you might want to say, okay, I this doesn't feel right, so I'm going to find a more stable tradition. And another thing is, I think I can speak like this because I'm not married, and I don't have children, so I can be a little bit more experimentative with what I'm trying to do with my thing. I think if I had a child, I would just swallow and go straight to public Catholic, because just something that I can pass on to explain. So I think that, yeah, all of those things. What do you guys make of those messy ideas?
Well, I don't know. I still, the idea of estuary being like church adjacent or being outside the church, I still don't understand why the church can't just be like an estuary with sacraments and rituals. I think the only reason people think the church can't be like an estuary is because of we have to have this either or confessional boundary where people self-identify to these certain ideas instead of just pursuing the person who is truth, who is an icon, who you're never going to encapsulate in a set of propositions. It's just, I think the reason people talk about all this estuary adjacent to church thing, and then why people who don't want to affirm all the propositions see it as a bait and switch, is because of confessionalism. This is why I hate confessionalism so much. Why can't, because here's the thing, like I've said this before to people, like Chalcedon, I don't know what I think about it. I don't know what my opinion is on it. I don't care.
Yeah.
Why isn't that okay?
I don't think. Okay, so I think there are John Vervaeke, people like John Vervaeke. I think there'll be. Because Christianity is very, very, very specific. Like there's estuary is not Christianity. Christianity is not estuary. Christianity is centered around the person of Jesus Christ. That's what you're searching. But in an estuary, you don't know that, or people walk into estuary not knowing. I'm a Christian, so I can say this. They walk into estuary not knowing that they're searching for Christ. But as a Christian, I believe they are searching for Christ, because ultimately we all know that's what the incarnation, the resurrection.
They'll just call it truth, goodness, and beauty, whatever. That's Christ to me.
Yes, well, exactly.
We're fine.
Go on, Chad.
What if? Well, I mean, to me, it makes me think of, like, there's a reason why you have a lock on your front door, and you don't just want any Joe to come in off the street and come in and start wearing your clothes and eating your food, and whether they pay or don't pay, right? Like, like that to me is the whole purpose of what the confessionalism kind of thing is. It is somewhat of a safety for ridiculousness. Unfortunately, we have to deal with this. And I was thinking about this as it relates to just, people wanting to, like, let's say if I moved into the church where I'm at now, and then all of a sudden I decide, like, well, and they make me like a deacon of the church, and then I decide, well, I don't really like this, and I'm going to come in and start thrashing around and like changing things. It's like, why do I have the right to do that? I mean, isn't there like a billion other churches that I can just go to that will probably accommodate what I'm looking for? And so that's why I think, and this is why estuary is explicitly not Christianity. This is why it's better off church adjacent. Because maybe like right now, if somebody came in here on this live stream and you didn't have a lock on this thing, and they just start like dropping like whatever kind of images that are ridiculous. I mean, there's a reason for it. I think it can go wrong, obviously, in the other direction, and I understand your argument in that way. But in this other way, I think that it's probably safer than not to have it.
Yeah. But Chad, all your illustrations are behavioral. They're not self-identity to abstractions.
I'd also add, like,
I don't know what that means.
You're talking about how people are behaving. people are behaving in crude or lewd or divisive ways, which I would agree with you. That's why I've talked about that Frank Viola, Greg Boyd article on what is heresy. Heresy is how one behaves in the world.
Mhm.
It is not how you relate to ideas. I mean, maybe it's how you relate to ideas. Like if you are not open to new ideas and closed-minded in that sense that you can't intellectually repent of things, maybe you're heretical. Because that's behavior.
Where I did resonate with that, like one of the big things when Jess and I were doing Kansas City Estuary, when we had our little document, one of the things we said is, this is not church. We think that's important because there is a sense, like if you're going to come together in a common community, there has to be at least some boundaries. Like you have to have it. And, you know, at Estuary, you want everyone to be able to just talk about anything, right? As long as it's in good faith, right? Hey, you can bring this up. You know, one of the challenges that Jess had, because we ended up doing it at his church, is some of the folks were church folk. Well, at the end of the conversation, we're going to tell people the right answer, right? And it's like, no, that's not what we're doing here, right? But at the same time, like, so it's not church, but there has to be some in church. There is proclaiming of some truths, right? There's a lot of mystery, and I think some places allow a lot more mystery than others and don't define things as much as others. But I do think it is more than that. And I think there is some idea around not just the behavioral stuff, but about kind of some boundaries about so who you're going to, what you're going to claim about who God is or isn't. Like the church has to take a stand on that.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just yes, and to what you've said, Lance, and what Chad said before it got off. I also think that there's a weird thing in Christianity that Christ insists that you claim him and you claim him publicly, and I think that can't be something that Estuary sort of that can't be the tellus of every Estuary, that at the end of the day we claim and affirm. I think that's what a church is. An Estuary is not that, and that difference. Are you doing, Andrea? I think that difference allows for the salt water to come in and mix with the fresh water. But I agree with you that as long as there's at least a Christian and an Estuary, in one sense, Estuary is church, because the body of Christ is represented in that space at that time. So in that sense, yes, but not in the this is what we're banded over church.
And I do think like there is a sense like, so there's a time and a place for everything. Like I guarantee anybody could walk into Paul, somebody from Sacramento, could go in and ask him any question they wanted to ask him, and he would engage that person and talk about that thing, and so on and so forth. But then there's also, there's time and place. If he's doing a Bible study and someone's, in there just caught, really questioning all these things and rabble-rousing the crowd or so on and so forth, Paul would ask them to allow a very broad range of people to ask hard questions in that environment, because that's just who he is. And I've seen a lot of pastors, priests or whatever, that would do those sorts of things. But there does become that point to where, and then by the way, there's an Estuary too. Like if you're a beef thinker or you're bad faith and all you want to do is argue and fight for your position and everything else, and you're not allowing the group to be able to have good faith conversation, then you shouldn't be a part of the Estuary. At some point, you do have to take a particular monster out who might eat the whole group.
Can I ask a question? I'm just wondering why, like when I first jumped on, we were talking about different things, and now we're talking about gatekeeping. I'm just wondering why. Like how did we move? I must have missed the transition somehow.
People want to keep the wolves out, the snakes.
I think the gatekeeping is can Estuary and church. Like can Estuary be church? And I think the gatekeeping was what Chad came in here to make the point about it is, it's like, hey, within a church there needs to be some boundaries set, Where I think an estuary, I think it's a much broader thing that you know.
Really?
A couple
I
of
would have said,
I mean, like in the, the Orthodox Church, the architecture of the church actually has this baked in.
Mm-hmm.
It's all baked in. There is an estuary in the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say, why can't we just apply the same metaphor of the fringe that we were talking about with the Protestant church and the everything else, and that Teo was talking about, and just apply that to estuary as well. I mean, it's realistically, I guess realistically is probably not. In my view, everything is within Christ. Like he holds all things. So, and like, I get that like the words we use are important, and the naming things frames them, and also sets boundaries. And saying estuary is not church is useful for people who do not want to be in a church but do want to talk. But at the same time, like there's like this secret hidden truth of that it is. I mean, everything is church.
Yeah, like Callistos Ware said something that impressed me when I was first inquiring into Orthodoxy. I watched a lot of Callistos actually.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that the Orthodox Church talks about itself as the true church, but it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't believe that there's no salvation outside of the church.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, what does that mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people take offense at the word true church because they think it means that theirs isn't true, but that's not what it's
Mm-hmm.
talking about. It's talking about a womb, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
talking about a place where something can grow and become. And if that's what is happening, if that's what the person, finds themselves seeking, then that place is true for that
Mm-hmm.
reason, right? It makes that possible. It's fertile. It's the ground on which you can become, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Sherry,
It's not
that's
true
like
because you're not true. It's
that's
true in and of itself because it allows for that kind of growth.
what when I did that video on what is church, that's what it is. If you find yourself becoming a true human being
Mm-hmm.
and growing and flourishing somewhere, by my understanding, you're in the church. And yes, is there a church where there are sacraments and tradition and history? I'm not denying the Orthodox Church. I'm a member of the Orthodox Church.
Mm-hmm.
But this is why I think, like, is that happening in estuary? Do we have evidence that it's happening?
Well, like, just quickly back to that, if you're in a place where how did you put that, Luke?
Growing,
Where
transforming, becoming a true human being.
transforming. Like, I was in no church building and not affiliated to any church for 23 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I was growing and becoming closer to theosis, closer to God, right? Closer to that thing. So it's like, was I in the church? Yeah. And if people ask me what's the church, I'll tell them it's the cosmos. That's what I'll tell them.
Yes. Well,
because that's my experience, right? So, but this gets back to what Luke was talking about earlier about being true, being honest with yourself, right? Like, are you because I think when you're trying to escape God, you're essentially being dishonest with yourself because you keep having to shut off that thing that is calling you. And we're all called, right? We are all called. So, as soon as you start finding ways to shut that off, then you started to lie to yourself about reality.
I want to address what Paul said here, because it's true.
Yeah, I did too. Yep.
But it's not. I don't think you're hearing what I'm saying then, because I'm not denying the sacred space of the church and the altar, and that certain things happen there that you and other things don't.
Mhm.
But also the church has the icon of Mary in front of it, and then at the back it has like the Dormition of Mary, because you're called into the church, but you're also called out of the church to make the entire cosmos where God can be all in all.
Mhm.
So the spirit of estuary and what's happening within estuary and the becoming a true human being is a very church thing. That doesn't mean that you can go do it behind the iconostasis.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah. And it's like, well, God is everywhere present, filling all things. Like, I mean, so, but the particular space and place, right? So for example, like how in Orthodoxy, how the church is laid out is very specific, right? Like the Jonathan Pajot had a wonderful conversation. He has so many conversations about the patterns and everything else. And so, and I would go to Paul. Like one of the things I would say there is like also the Orthodox Church. The priest literally has nothing to do with the focus of the day is because it's set, right? They're not trying to figure out what I'm going to, you might what your homily is, but you know what your homily is going to be because you're going to have scriptures that are given to you for that day, for that liturgy, if you're going to end up doing that. And so very much the Orthodox Church is a very it's patterns. It's daily, weekly, monthly, annually, that has very little input to be changed by individuals. And so that place is for a thing. And I think like what Sherry was pointing to is the Orthodox Church has it when you go from, the nave to the sanctuary to the coffee hour. It has all these places and spaces. But what I would define as what's happening in the services or what happens in the church, estuary does not happen there. Estuary is wonderful. People transform, become. People are transformed in 12-step groups. People are transformed in doing all sorts. I was transformed by playing football. Like literally transformed. It was transformed. That's like all that stuff's good and great, but it's not church. But God is everywhere present, filling all things. Like God was there too.
Okay, I'm gonna get going. I just put that in the private chat, so Lance and Sherry, you guys can just go on as far as it goes on. The thing I would say to this point is I'm still going to keep hitting my confessionalism drum, because I think that's the reason why people want to have this distinction. The reason Sam Tiedemann is here is because there aren't confessions. The reason we're all here is because there aren't confessions. And it's because of this new medium that is different than the written word that made us forget, which is where confessions came from, which are different than creeds, which are symbols of the faith. Creeds are by their nature iconic and polysemous, and they allow for personal meaning. Confessions do not. And I'll keep saying it until I die. That's my last word.
Thank you, Luke.
See you guys.
See ya.
Cassidy jumped in. It seems like, and Andre.
Yeah. Oh.
Hi, guys.
It's interesting what you were saying about gatekeeping before, because what you were saying, setting boundaries within the church, but less so in estuary. I would have thought it would be the other way around. Isn't estuary supposed to be more of a personal and like closed-knit thing, whereas church is sort of open and inviting to a limit?
Sorry, Andre, can you repeat that? I think I missed a piece.
Well, so Lance was saying something about gatekeeping and having boundaries within the church, but estuary was more open. And I would have thought it would be the other way around. The church is all inviting to those who seek it. But obviously there's a limit. Like you can't let murderers in or like wanting to cause harm. But estuary is like a closed-knit and personalized thing where people want to grow.
I think both are the same. Like in Kansas, let's just say any estuary group, anybody's welcome to come. And I think in church, everybody's welcome to come. You're just not welcome to stand up and do what you want and say what you want at any given moment or whatever. Like there are just traditions and customs in any sort of space. And I think estuary is the same thing. Everyone's welcome to come. And, I think, for example, I would just bet it would take a lot to get kicked out of Paul's church. Like he would let someone be there for a long time before, but eventually he's had to do that from time to time. I think the same is kind of with estuary. Like there are people that are just going to come in with bad faith, dominate the conversation, just always a beef thinker that has to be right and espouse their views on people, everything else. And at some point, it just makes the sense for the enjoyment of the rest of the group that we're just like, hey, this probably isn't for you. I mean, we have a thing that we're doing here that's based on good faith conversation, and this seems to be not a place for you. Maybe if you want to go out and find there are plenty of people who want to argue in the world, and if you want to go convert people to your ideology, go do that out there.
So it's more like if it's a bad fit, because like I don't think you can necessarily like know someone's intention, and if they're in bad faith, that you can identify bad behavior. And like if like the vibe isn't for them, like estuary is not the place where they need to be. Like they need to be on like a Discord group arguing with like other intellectuals or academics, butting heads, rather than wanting to like grow and further themselves spiritually. So
I mean, I feel like churches are very open, but they have more sort of order and structure in them, especially if you want to be some type of member or like good standing member, right? Like churches have lots of visitors, and I'll talk to the Orthodox church because I'm in it now, but anybody can come in and go to a liturgy. Everybody can take communion.
Yeah.
Like there are certain stages, and in Orthodoxy, it's really not up to you when you can start taking communion. You really do have to work with the priest and figure out how to get permission. And usually priests wait about a year so that you can see the whole liturgical cycle before he'll bring you in officially to the church. And, each priest is a little bit different, and each case is a little bit different because of what you know. But that there are certain structures, and this is why I find Paul's sort of description interesting, the difference between a walled garden and an estuary. Anybody can come in and be a good standing member despite, their beliefs, and there's not so many religious sort of bounds there. But if someone comes to the Orthodox Church, anybody can come to a liturgy, but not everybody's going to be able to participate in the fullness. And I mean, even myself, I can't ever be a priest. That's a restriction that I'm always going to have on me. Now, I'm not upset about that. I think that I understand why it is, but there's always going to be some of these bounds that I don't think should be as flexible as a estuary, which is not trying to create a religious tradition that is
I think that's the key word right there. It's a formal, like you said, religious tradition, right? And it's a formal space. And I honestly, like in my mind, I don't really see the difference between a rock concert and a liturgy, or I mean, I do see the difference, okay, but as a formal space. Not everybody is allowed on stage.
Yeah.
Not everybody can try, the 3 chords that they know how to play on so-and-so's guitar, right?
Yeah.
Because
you can't have all chaos. You can't have all chaos.
Yeah, and the people who are there to watch, they paid to see the band, not some Joe Blow who thinks he knows it all, right? So it's like, or even, like the prayer breakfast at the White House. Okay, if you want to put it in a religious tone, not everybody gets to sit at the front with Obama and Biden and whoever else got invited, right? And eat their food, right? Like there's formality in ritual, and all of
Yeah.
those things are ritual. And there's what's the word I'm looking for? There's appropriate and inappropriate behavior in those spaces. And just because Christians preach love doesn't mean that they have to let everything happen to them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it's not you need to preserve the formal space so that you can see the story that's being told in that space.
Be wise as serpent, and soft as a dove. Like, there's the soft side and hard side of leadership. Like, that stuff exists. Like, you got to have that.
Well, it's theater. Think about it in that way. It's theater. It's and I don't mean it in a derogatory manner, and I'm not just talking about the Orthodox Church. I'm talking about all of these kinds of things, right? We get to see something unravel before our eyes, right? And if you interrupt it with inappropriate behavior or license, then the theater, the story that's being told gets broken up into pieces, and you lose the thread, right? So,
and I think one of the things that gets to is people hate the idea of submitting to certain things, but it's actually a really important thing. Like, if I want to be a member of AA, for example, I have to submit to certain things to be a part of that group. It's just what that is, right? So one of the things that happened to me, I was baptized as an infant in the Methodist Church. But when I came into the evangelical world, infant baptism wasn't a sufficient baptism. Like, let's don't act like there's not the gatekeepers. Like, so you have to be adult baptized. Now, here was the deal. I know to be a part of that group, that was part of their thing. I didn't feel like I needed to be rebaptized, but I didn't argue with them about it either. Here's where they say, here's what we do. You want to join us? And you got to do this, and you got to do that, and whatever. I was like, okay, fine, I'll do that. And so people don't want to submit to certain things and understand that there are these certain parameters and rules that you can't just have everything you want it. If you want to join this particular group, this is what it is.
Lance, do you think? Oh, sorry. I just quick question.
Is that a catechized baptism you have to go through, the adult baptism?
Because I would just say this, because there are certain brands of Protestantism that believe there has to be this mental assent as an adult for you to make this decision, because there's something that that happens in that moment that you have to make that decision, and then order for you to become truly baptized. And then there's important, because that's a moment of salvation, right? Because you're saved now. Versus, so you have all this stuff baked into the cake there. So it becomes very important to their theology that you do that. Sherry, what were you going to ask?
Well, I was going to ask you in regards to submitting. You were talking about submitting yourself to some of the tenets of AA, for example. If you want to be a participant, it strikes me as that being, for example, a moment of repentance, right? It's like the first step in that process, because for me, repentance is metanoia. Okay, it's an evolution of consciousness. It's a turning. And if you're not ready to be part of AA, that will be the first place that you say, no, I'm not going to make that turn, right? I'm not going to allow metanoia into my life. I don't want to come under I don't want to submit myself to your rules, right? But I think that when you know that you lack something that can be provided for you in a place like AA, you literally have to get down on your knees and crawl under the fence, right, that they have put up around AA. You have to crawl underneath of that on your knees right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you are entering into a space where you can be transformed, and you know that it's going to cost you something, right? And so to me and I'm just using the AA thing, that kind of submission is the first step towards the evolution of your consciousness.
Yeah.
I think it's very helpful to frame it in this idea of a story, because what are you doing as a church member? You're basically submitting yourself to a shared story and encouraging each other to live in that story more and more. And so the best churches sort of move towards traditions in whatever way they can feel good about them to reinforce that story. And it's certainly an act of trust to submit yourself to that story. And
right.
Not everybody can make that leap. And so that's where I think that difference between the openness of estuary versus church, like there's more of a singular story in a lot of churches than there is in estuary. In fact, you need multiplicity of stories in estuary to make it work. But that's not the same with church.
And last week, Freddie wants to participate in estuary, but it's sort of at a level that he really struggles with. And so last week we went around the circles, and then Freddie basically has been put on a timeout with respect to the praise team for a variety of reasons that I won't go into here. And he'll be on the praise team again at some point. But, this is all part of modulating these things. I think it's helpful to recognize that I couldn't articulate until watching this stream that there's a deep connection between estuary and confessionalism, in that Protestant churches modulate these issues with words instead of physicality. And in an Orthodox church, I mean, you're exactly right. You have a structure. It's built into the room. And it's built into the liturgy, and not only the liturgy, but because part of the liturgy is where you stand, what you do, what you say, where you are. And so basically what estuary is sort of applying this in a Protestant space where we're saying, okay, we don't have these gradients of holiness that are delineated through the architecture and the structure and the liturgy. We're doing it through confessionalism, which is an imperfect tool. You will not get me to not agree to that. Confessionalism is an imperfect tool, but it's helpful. And Sherry, when you talked about all of those years outside the church where God was working on you, I thought Lance put it beautifully, because God is everywhere. But when you look at, let's say, Israel in the desert, this is, can a holy God live in the midst of an unholy people? And so you have clean, unclean, you have all this structure in the camp that deals with these things. And all of the traditions are sort of wrestling with these same dynamics, but in different ways. And I think, the fact that in some ways Protestantism just became too, it just kept floating up. That's part of the reason this move back down to Orthodoxy and Catholicism with space, physicality. And so I see the Holy Spirit working through the church in this way, continuing to refine and adjust as the church and the world, as God continues to do his work of on earth as it is in heaven. So, but this has been an absolutely astounding, amazing conversation about orthodoxy and estuary, and super helpful to me. I just want to talk to Andre's point, then I got to get out of here too. Andre's point about the personal, I think, was also a really good point too, in that orthodoxy or estuary is funny, because on one hand, it is very open. It's not completely open. Freddie, I had to tell Freddie, now's not the time that we're going to discuss, why you're on a timeout with respect to praise band. That we can have that we'll have that conversation later in a different room. So Freddie had to learn that boundary. But at the same time, Andre is right in that estuary groups are down to 6 to 8 people. So in that sense, they're more personal. And Sherry was actually very right that, you know, anybody can walk into an Orthodox church and observe the liturgy. But, you know, then Cassidy said, and if you want to, you know, partake in the Eucharist, if you want to go up these higher levels, well, then there is submission involved, and then and similar things. But I think it's helpful to understand confessionality in a Protestant way is a way of addressing what Orthodoxy does with liturgy and architecture and all of those things, because they're very much analogous.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, Paul, I always saw the estuary as the narthex, actually, in the Orthodox Church, right?
Yeah.
I always, and it's interesting because in iconography, there's always a door of Pentecost, right, that is open, and that is also where the estuary flows in to the church. Right.
But part of what we're doing with the estuary protocol is that, and Protestant churches have a narthex too. They don't often call it something. You know, they all these fellowship of Paul, yada yada yada. Yeah, part of what I think we're seeing now is we can no longer sort of assume that people off the street are going to know how to fellowship in that way. And so what estuary does is creates a protocol that can sort of, so that's what I'm seeing at 9 a.m. At Living Stones, where we've got some of our older members, some of our newer members, people who are not members, and they're getting to know each other. Whereas, you know, having a donut after church and a little bit of coffee wasn't cutting it. Wasn't cutting it.
Paul, just a quick question. Do you think that estuary has become a necessity because in general, in the culture today, people are just at odds with how to speak to each other?
I think it's part of the fact that if you think about a medieval church, the church at the center of the town, everyone in town, the women are washing clothes together, the men are doing fields together, they're watching sheep together. You had this level of community built in via survival that you could just assume, or men were doing business together. In other words, what's happening during the week sort of gets highlighted then on Sunday. And so you have this dynamic of back and forth. In our world, people are, you know, how many people are doing, you know, working at home, but they're not, you know, they're on screens. And so we're just way too fragmented. So estuary is a way to say, we're going to take these group of people, and you know what? They're going to get to know each other. And that's going to take work, because the times that they used to get to know each other, they're no longer together.
Yeah, that's good. That's helpful.
When you speak about like rising to another level with the Eucharist, is that only for Orthodoxy that like you have to like undertake the liturgy for like a year, as opposed to Protestantism? I thought Protestantism, you could just come in and take the Eucharist straight away.
It varies. It's all over the board. There's open table. There's have to be a member. So you've got to figure out what tradition you're in to figure out where that's at.
Right.
And I thought Tayo was dead on right about Protestantism is a fringe, and fringes are important.
Yeah, I thought that was really good. I think one of the things, I'll come back here, Chad asked this specific question, Lance, what would an estuary sponsor look like? That was the thing that I've struggled at. So he's taken from an AA world. So we see these patterns. So at AA, you can have a speakers meeting where someone goes and they're dynamic and they're the charismatic pastor type. And it's awesome. And it's fun. That's good. But then you go down and then there's a meeting. where there will be 10 to 20 people, and then everyone can kind of share their story, but you're mindful of the other people's time, and you can share anything, but there's some stuff. And then you move down the line, and then there's a sponsor, which is a disciple leader, right? So Sunday church is fun or whatever, but then there's small group, and that's more powerful. Then you get into a sponsor or a disciple leader, and that's where the rubber really hits the road, where you can really take the mask off. You can share those things that maybe shouldn't be shared in a group of 5 or 7 people, because maybe it involves your spouse or something, and there's this really troubling thing. That's where you can get in and you start doing the dirty work, and you start living it out together. So in estuary, Chad and I can't help map onto what we know, and so estuary is like the AA meeting, where it's good. You can have some conversation. When estuary really gets good, people start taking their masks off, and you start sharing some really vulnerable things because it's a safe group. And now we're really getting into conversation. But then how do you get down to that disciple level, to use church terminology, or sponsor level? So estuary, so what does that look like in estuary? I think we also have the big, the conferences or the big meetings, right? So we've got the big meetings down. We've got the smaller groups, which is small group, but how do you go down to that next level? Because what Chad knows is the magic happens at that one-on-one level.
I think, sorry, Paul can answer, but I'm just gonna give my own perspective really quickly. I think that happens. So if you read the Google Estuary Protocol document, John Van Dyck includes in it that the end goal of estuary is friendship forming, and that's how I think that happens. So I think, like you rightly said, in an estuary meeting, there are certain things that might be inappropriate to share with everyone in the group. But what happens is you find with people sharing their story, people click with each other closer than or different levels with everyone else in the group. And the closer you get, the more you're willing to share with that person, and friendship develops. So people speak outside of the estuary meeting. And I think in those circumstances, that's where the vulnerability can be at a different level. For example, I'm currently streaming from the home of Liz, who I met through estuary, and there's now a friendship that's gone past just the estuary meetings, such that I'm now a lodger in a house.
I think
Wow,
Tayo
that's
nailed it.
awesome.
And you too, Lance. I mean, that's exactly right. So basically what I did with Freddie in the estuary meeting, to just kind of say, Freddie, I appreciate your feeling really a little pinched because you were put on a timeout with respect to praise group. Now's not the place. And then, Freddie and I have a conversation. It's helpful to also understand priesthood of all believers, this Protestant move, in the light of this. And because in many ways, part of what's happening in churches right now is there's a leadership crisis, partly because we want, and Protestants and Orthodox and Catholics have to deal with this, we want our clergy to be multi-use tools. We want them to know theology. We want them to be able to have, good interpersonal skills. We want them to be able to do confession. And so we want our clergy to be multi-use tools, and some people can do that, but it's incredibly expensive. And so what sort of priesthood of all believers did was say, we're going to have a lot of different tools. So you can be an AA sponsor, but you don't necessarily have to know a lot of theology. Now, you might learn some other things. And so as the complexity of the world grew, priesthood of all believers allowed for more moving things around. Now, I see, the diaconate in the Roman Catholic and Orthodox settings. The other traditions are accommodating and adopting, because the difficulty of these models, these wineskins, as things change, the demands change. I mean, one of the issues that I saw living in the Dominican Republic and living in the United States, many people in the Dominican Republic could live without a lot of cash because they had their little conuco, they called it. It was their little garden. And so they ate from their garden. And so cash was for one part of their life and food was another. If you live in a city in North America, you've got, mortgage, utilities, transportation, food, and it's all by cash. And so what you see is Protestantism was also a very urban thing, and so there's just a lot of things to this, and basically what the church does in these different ways is, on one hand, you try to hold on to what you got because there's good there, and then you learn flexibility, and this is exactly what we'll continue to see with all of the traditions. It's just they're dealing with the challenges in different ways.
I think it's important to also remember. I think it's important to also remember that, you know, the baby boomers that left Catholic Church and High Church, what were they leaving and why? Because, and why does all this modern rock stuff exist? Because there was a lack of the personal in the High Church, and now every single person that's going from evangelicalism into the Catholic Church, just like Luke's talking about, are bringing all their personalism with them. And it's beautiful, and it's wonderful, and it's right. But they had to learn, like the culture had to learn hard lessons in everything that we're seeing in the last 20 years. Had to learn extremely hard lessons. And so, I mean, my 2 generations of my family are living this. I said this on Paul's video. My mother-in-law's brother is an archbishop in the Catholic Church, and her sister's a nun. She left the Catholic Church for a personal faith 20 years ago, 30 years ago. She left the Catholic Church because of Beth Moore and someone talking about a God that was close and near, not far. And but yet here I am, 30 years later, really interested in the ideas of sacramentalism in the High Church. But I hear her voice, and I go to church with her, and I hear her voice say, it's really hard for me to go to church at the Evangelical Church on the Sundays that they do communion. I actually want to make up excuses not to go. What is she bringing with her? Her Catholicism. And so, you know, I think, and how many people 60 and 70 years old that are going to these mega churches that were Catholic when they were 5? So I think it's not one or the other. It's like it's big cultural shifts. And
you're seeing it go back. And Paul, one of the things I'm realizing, so I was brought up in the Methodist Church. Well, I love so much of Wesley. Like, there's a lot of Orthodoxy in Wesley. Like, so there's a reason I was primed for a lot of Orthodoxy in my Wesleyan upbringing. Okay, so I have to be very honest about that. But one of the things, so I left when I saw things were starting to happen in the early 2000s, and I went non-denominational. But what I'm really realizing is there is such value in vocational priesthood and pastoring, because again, we talk about boundaries. Like there was a consistency to a Methodist pastor, and in fact, they all were kind of very genteel, quiet. There was a Methodist pastor type. You know what I'm talking about, Paul? So I, as a young charismatic guy, is like, I love going to church. Would almost think I could give a better sermon, but what I looked at myself is like, I'm not measured and quiet like these men, so I can't be a pastor because I'm not like them, right? Which if I'd had a conversation with them, they would have had a totally different conversation with me, but that's just what I thought. But when you lose the vocation, which is secret church, you better be able to put butts in the seats and produce a budget or you won't be around. Where the vocational pastor can park on a corner in Sacramento and serve people and just be there. There also is some discipline that comes in that. If Paul gets too far off the scales, he can be disciplined. We can do that. Like there was safety in the family. Like you can have a parsonage, you can have a pension. You're not going to get rich, but you can survive. The collapse of the main line has created this ultimate wilding of Protestantism that I'm not saying this because I'm an Orthodox. I was house church. I was seeing these problems and watching these things happen and was struggling to figure out how do we address this. And we're getting ready to go as this main line fully collapses. There is a time that I think Protestants need to have our eyes wide open. It's like, what are we doing and how are we going to solve for this? Because it's gotten so. You talk about a fringe. The fringe at least had boundaries around the fringe with mainline, and those boundaries, those walls are being broken down. That fringe is going to break out.
Part of it's from the political too. I mean, obviously, because evangelicalism and Protestantism are obsessed with the political, and people want out to find the deep meaning. I found myself a year ago outside of a church I've been involved in for 20 years, and now I'm with 50 people in a house church. We live 2 hours from an Orthodox church, and most of them are ex-Baptists that have fallen in love with liturgy. And so it's like, well, what do you do? And so you're actually taking a community of people through this journey. Like I live in rural Arkansas. Like this isn't just the cities that this stuff is happening in.
Yeah.
And people are brokenhearted by what happened. I mean, you could basically map the rise and fall of Mars Hill onto a church of 300 to 500. So like, what are we doing? And we are in the wild. And I'm going to Symbolic Meaning Conference, not because I think in my heart I've got to be Orthodox, but I need more tools to care and to understand this faith in a way that's going to stand up against out in the wild, I guess.
Yeah.
I linked in.
I just wanted to. Sorry, Paul. I just want to take the opportunity to welcome Wesley. He jumped in here and he hasn't said a word, and nobody's actually acknowledged him. So I just wanted to say welcome and just jump in, Wesley. Like if you because this is how this goes here. Just jump in, interrupt. Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Paul.
Just one more point. In Twitter, I dropped in Mere Orthodoxy. Jake Meter wrote a post, which was just astounding, from a Reformed, where he compared Keller and Piper and Carson, and how this older generation had, exactly like you said, Lance, had 20, 30 years of time in the wilderness learning basic pastoring and the institutions they built. And then the Xers like Driscoll and a few others, one of whom killed himself, who they just sort of flamed out in this world. And so you read all the way through to the end of the document, and he notes that what's happening now, it's exactly like you said, Lance, exactly like you said, Christian. There's a rewilding going on. And so in that rewilding, many people are going to places like Orthodoxy, Catholicism, because it's physically shelter from the storm. It really is.
Not only that though, it's I don't know about Catholicism very much, but Orthodoxy is cosmic.
Yeah.
Like it actually is a wild place. Like,
Yeah. Well, one of the ways they talk about the church here is it's the ark.
Yeah, and it's even the liturgy itself, you've got people are standing wherever. There are places where they don't stand, but everything else is up for grabs. And, there's kids running around and people bowing and kissing icons and, and then you look up and it's a dome full of stars with the Lord of Hosts overhead, right? And so that's what impressed, because like I said, I spent 23 years in the bush worshiping God, conversing with God, and I knew I needed community, but I didn't know where to go. I didn't even know the Orthodox Church existed. And then suddenly I found the place where I always was. This is the thing that really shook me up. Like I never had, nothing changed in a sense, except that I had community. And I speak as if I go to church every Sunday, and I don't, because I don't have one near me, right? But I have my icon corner, and I have the dome up over my head. Like when I step outside, I'm in church. And I'm going to cry.
I got to run, people. I thought this morning's live stream was just absolutely amazing. And so thank you all. Thank Luke for initiating it. And thank you all because to me, this is what we're doing right now. This is why I'm here for it, because this is so helpful for me. And I think it's it's helpful for a number of us. And this is small still, these live streams are 20, 30 people, which I think is beautiful. But anyway, God will continue to be faithful and work through his church and all of this. So
thanks, Paul.
God is good.
See you, Paul.
Wesley, would you like to join? You popped in. Telling the Vision, West Curry, Huntington.
Is he behind his green screen?
Just a note, someone in the comments said that Graham is about to stream. So we potentially might want to land the plane for him, but I leave it up to you guys as moderators.
Absolutely. We just continue
We might want to just keep the conversation going.
Either way, I'm just relaying information.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks. Cassidy, I wish I could see your baby, but I get it that you're not showing us.
I mean, I can show you.
No, don't. Don't.
Don't.
Okay.
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I don't. She's been on the internet. It's fine.
Oh my gosh! Look at those cheeks. Oh, I gotta put my glasses on.
Yeah, Nelliana just got baptized, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Last Sunday. Yes.
No. Oh, wow.
Yes, you got baptized, didn't you? Yeah.
Well, I saw the vision from Jesus, so I wanted to pray to him right now and ask Jesus in these very minutes to put a taste of honey in every one of your mouths. Jesus, in his word, which I hope to draw you to his word, he said, I will give no more any flattering divination nor vain vision within the house of Israel. And it's also written that, I shall pour of my spirit on all flesh. Your young men shall see visions, your old men shall dream dreams. And in James chapter 5 are these words. Go to now, rich men, weep and howl for the miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted. It says, your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were like unto fire. And also in Psalm 23 are the words.
Wait, Wesley. Can I just
Yeah.
ask you what the theme is here? Like, can you maybe consolidate what it is that you're trying to convey through reading these scriptures?
Yes, in James chapter 5, in Psalm 23 is a valley in the shadow of death. And the vision of the valley is also written in Isaiah, the burden of the valley of vision. What aileth thee now, that thou art wholly gone up to the housetops? There's also in Habakkuk, the vision is written that it is to be written plainly on the table. So Jesus fulfilled the part where he came in the sky with the clouds with his angels. He spoke the words, "It is time." And then he poured of his spirit on all flesh. And then the liar, the thief, Baal or Satan, spoke the words, "sad and delicious." So Jesus showed me a vision. And there's a drawing of the vision there in that little space where I'm given a view screen. I failed Jesus. When Jesus forgives us of all manner of sin. But I'm not always able to forgive all manner of sin. In particular, somebody that does a reprobate sin against me and doesn't even ask me for forgiveness. It's like they know they've done something against me and they're not even going to ask for forgiveness for it. So I'm of the flesh. So, forgiving somebody like that is not always very easy for me. And I have to be strong and do so. Even though they don't even ask for that forgiveness. A forgiveness like a father and a son, a father is going to forgive their son of pretty much anything the kid does. But when it's a stranger, it's not always so easy to forgive like that. So in the vision, Jesus showed me, like he wrote in James chapter 5, gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were like a fire. When I don't forgive, I'm like a foot that is cut off that doesn't bleed. And when I am double-minded and I am double-tongued, I am like two little creatures, one of them cutting off the foot, and then the other one lifting its hands and smiling like it was a religious thing, and nothing was wrong, and yet no words were said. And when I don't read the Bible, I'm like a square pit. And when I make an ultimatum or an unfriendly order, I fail you. And when I fail you, I fail Jesus. And that's the meaning of the unknown depth in the pit that Jesus showed me. And I make the error, being a feeble man, of blaming and accusing. Sometimes just in, passive conversation and chit-chat with people, we start talking about things of common nature, of sport and politics. And I find myself trapped into the devil's way of blaming and accusing. And when I blame and accuse, I fail you. I fail Jesus. That's the meaning of the full moon. And often my faith is a branchless faith. And when have a branchless faith, I'm like a straight branchless tree in a row with other branchless trees. And there was sand in the pit in the vision Jesus showed to me. And the meaning of that is, what shall it profit a man should he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? I looked, and the water was still in the middle of the valley. And it is the still waters in Psalm 23. And there was a crooked path of spinning cankered gold and silver in the vision that Jesus showed to me. And the spinning means I have failed Jesus, and I fail him whenever I do magic or wizardry or sorcery or witchcraft. Now, what is magic, wizardry, and sorcery and witchcraft to Jesus? I'm not talking about what they are to the fictional fantasies and fables of movies and stories. Magic means watching too much TV. Sorcery means using a drug without a doctor's prescription, using a drug for pleasure without a doctor's prescription. That's what sorcery is. And witchcraft is being sluggish with the Holy Spirit. And wizardry is if I were to try to sell Jesus for money, if I were to try to make money off of Jesus' name, that's what wizardry is. But it's also important for us to tithe anonymously, not putting our name on it. But I haven't always tithed. So Jesus showed me bright green leaves on the trees that mean that I have failed him by not anonymously tithing 10% of my wealth to those who need it. So I told this vision, and I believe it is the vision that Jesus appeared to everyone on earth and all nations and said to tell. And I fear that you may have been fooled by the devil. He's a very powerful bad guy. And I believe he may have tried to tell you, don't tell the vision. And I believe the devil may have tried to pervert the word of Jesus in you. The words in Isaiah that Jesus said.
Hey, Wesley, who are you talking to?
Can you hear me?
No, I can hear you. You're making accusations that we feel like we've been deceived.
No, I'm not accusing you. I'm trying to make you aware that you will put up the good army.
Who, me personally?
Yeah. So Wesley, what about our conversation? We've been having a conversation here for 2.5 hours.
The devil wants to stay in disguise. He doesn't want you to reveal that he said to you, "I will turn and toss you violently like a ball." And I just want to I want to help you that you don't confuse that and think it was God that told you that.
Who's you? who's the you you're talking to? Because we're having a conversation with the 7 people in this room. Who's the you?
Jesus, would you shine the light of your revealing upon everybody's hands on earth in this minute? Now, if you see an ash in a spiritual nature on your hands, you are not baptized.
All right. Well, Wesley, would you like to participate in our? We appreciate that. We gave you a lot of room there to share what you wanted to share. Were there parts of our conversation other than kind of talking about this vision or kind of speaking there? Would you like to participate in the conversation? Because I think that's what we're here for.
Sure. Well, this is Jesus said it is
Seems
time.
like you're giving us a bit of a sermon. Wonderful. Love your
Jesus said it is time about this vision. Those are the words of the Holy Spirit. He also said, tell the vision you shall heal without money, and tell the vision you shall not need the mark. And when you didn't, he said, no time to talk, Allah, and you want war.
Okay.
Wesley, can you come on?
Wesley, we appreciate it. There we go. Wesley, we appreciate it. Yeah, we have conversations.
That's what I wanted to say.
And I appreciate it. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, estuary, where lots of people meet.
Amen.
Here's something that I want to bring up. Oh, do we have to go?
I'm just gonna sign off, guys. I have to go. I have to go herd some geese. They're hanging around my house, too close to my house.
All right. See you, Sherry.
Thank you, Sherry.
Bye.
Here's something I want to bring up to kind of
go ahead,
bring
Cassie.
it back around to the conversation. And you know, I don't say this to be contrarian. It's just in a lot of ways it's like the thing I'm wrestling with myself. As much as I think there's so much good coming from converts into Orthodoxy, I also wonder what is the danger of that as well. If we're not taking responsibility and understanding what that means of becoming part of the church, and where is that place, and how do we wrestle with that sort of process? There's a lot that's compatible, probably with all the branches of Christianity, but particularly Protestantism and Orthodoxy. There's a lot that's different, and I think I'm really wrestling with that idea of like, where is the responsibility as a convert to come in and bring in the good things that we've learned from the West, but where are the places where we have to recognize our own ignorance of the thing that we're being brought into?
I don't know. I think I'm in a unique position in that I just think I'm ignorant of everything. And I think, I mean, I'll just be honest. Like I feel a really strong desire to like become an official, leader in the church, not necessarily a priest, but like a deacon is probably as high as I'll aim. But I struggle with that a lot. Like I have what I believe to be a calling to serve the church, but I don't want to like make it worse. So I don't have any answers for you. I just agree on the struggle. I'm really working on it.
And I mean, I guess I bring the question not to necessarily say, oh, I need an answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the things that I'm questioning too. And the thing I think sometimes on the online spaces, we don't talk about because we get so excited about what Orthodoxy has brought us and like the beauty that we see in it.
Yeah.
And it's complicated. And it's like, I became Orthodox almost 2 years now, been exploring it for close to 5.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can't go back. There's what's to go back to? Like there's nothing to go back, and I don't want to go back. But you definitely, I feel that wrestling of the recognition of I'm learning a whole new culture, and I'm
Yeah.
I'm in some ways having to assimilate to it. And there's a lot of good that comes from that, but then there's a lot of hard things. And like, I think for me, it adds on top of that, because I'm literally in a new culture, also being in the Netherlands as an American, trying to learn a new language. And, you know, the cultures are similar enough, but, you know, there are all these differences. And so how do you take the right responsibility in that? In what places do you hold on to the old version of you and bring that into this new story? And what places do you die to yourself?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Like for me, this kind of goes back to my thing, which I think people hate the word obedience and they hate the word submission. And that happens all over, right? Particularly in the United States, the rugged individualist and everything else. And then, you know, particularly now in our culture, this total focus on self. So I think like I've fully submitted to, like, I have an opinion that I think if you're in the United States and you're not primarily a first generational church parish, I believe you should be doing most of your liturgy in English. Why? When Orthodoxy went to other places, they immediately translated the liturgy into that native tongue so people could understand, because the words matter, the liturgy matters. Now, there's some pushback on that. That being said, I have that opinion. But if I go to a church and that's not their thing, I can decide whether to stay there or not. But it's not for me to tell them what to do with their parish. I mean, they can make those conversations. Now, having those conversations like with the priest or whatever outside, I'll share honestly what I think, but I know it's not my position to say anything. I think like when Richard Rohr and Jonathan Pajot had a great conversation, and Richard Rohr gave some advice to people about not trying to change anything about, you know, food, this, that, or the other. And he would probably say me talking about the language that's being used. I think there is some of that submission. But what I do try to bring, and so this is where I get to your point, Cassidy, is I'm a generally excited person, and I'm passionate about things, and I'm passionate about what I'm learning and experiencing. One of the things I brought to myself, like when I see someone new, I go introduce myself right after the service. That's a little unique for some Orthodox parishes, but I want to be welcoming. And generally, I ask the question, the same thing I would ask here, like in the estuaries, like, what brings you here? And quite frankly, mostly it's I've met tons and tons and tons of young people, particularly mostly young men. It's some amalgamation of Jordan Peterson, Jay Dyer, Jonathan Pajot, like that. They found it here, and now they're seeking the place, and they're fascinated that I would even know who these people are, right? I also participate in all the weekly events. One thing Protestants are good is they'll show up on a Tuesday night for Bible study, and then if there's something on Friday, they go, and if there's Sunday service, they go to that, and if there's something, I go to all the services, and that's rare. So bringing our enthusiasm for this, I think what some of the cradle folks are realizing, even within a parish, are like, wow, like they're living, like they can see that. Right? They're like the excitement and that enthusiasm are things that you can bring, and trying to set up community, like literally having people over to your house for dinner, and not just participating at things at church, like those things we naturally do so well, but you can do that so organically, right? I don't have to change anything about what the church is. So I just try to bring what I think are some of the best elements of that into how I'm living that out. And my priest has encouraged me in that, or my priest in Kansas City, still trying to figure out what we're going to do here in Houston. But I would just bring all that to it, and I don't need to change them, but I can be authentically me when I'm there in Orthodoxy.
Just quick comments on what Lance just said. I think that's what my line of think. I'm not Orthodox, but I think. Sorry, probably better to ask you this, Cassidy. What are the similarities between your assimilation to the Netherlands and your assimilation to Orthodoxy, and what are the differences?
Sorry, technical glitch. Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, I think for me, it's just the recognition of like, you have to relearn the order and structure of how things work. You're learning a new language, you're learning a new process. And even though, well, in many ways, they do the liturgy in Dutch where I go. So I have to learn the new language to understand it. But there's some things that I already understand because of the language of Orthodoxy that's not strictly the words, the melodies and the form of the services.
The rhythm.
But the rhythm, yeah, exactly. But yeah, there's always this sort of barrier and structure. And like, I think for me, there's just, how would you say it? Yeah, there's just a lot of these little things of like having to sit and observe and not feel so comfortable being able to use my words to understand things. And I don't think that's for all places, just in my situation right now with the parish that I'm in and the place that I'm in. And that's really hard for me in a place similar to Neil, where I feel like I don't know anything. But I've also been around it enough to know something, but not have the confidence to trust that something. And so, yeah, it just gets sort of difficult because you feel like a child, but you're also an adult. You're like, I'm 30 years old. I have a baby. I'm supposed to teach her this thing. I don't even know it.
Yeah.
And, I want to give her the best, purest version of it, the healthiest version of it. But yeah, it's a slow process of like really having to just live and soak in it and take it in and embrace that uncomfortability with it. I know that was not particularly specific, but I'd have to think more about like the direct parallels of some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
I have about 10 more minutes. I can keep the stream open. So, hey, Zach, welcome.
Hello. I haven't had a vision. But hopefully I might have something to contribute quickly. Yeah, no, I've been really enjoying this. I've been waiting for my phone to charge up enough that I could actually join in. But in terms of what, so I'm a convert to Orthodoxy as well, so I wrestle with this from a different background because I wasn't an evangelical before. I was like a high church Anglican. As a broad thing, it's the experiences that we bring with us. Because if anyone comes in with like an idea in their head trying to reform the church, then they're obviously not really coming in with the right mindset. But if you're coming in with your own experiences and telling them to people, the effect that has is immediately evident. In some ways, it sort of bolsters a lot of confidence in people that are maybe worried about one of the big themes is people worried about their children abandoning the faith. Is something you just hear over and over again.
Yeah,
as people going, they're seeing everything in the culture and going, how do I keep my children? How do I keep my children? And seeing people in their 20s come and join and saying, hey, yeah, no, we think this is true. They're sort of blown away and go, wait, what? Really? I thought my children were going to leave, and it helps them not be as panicked. Actually, helps a lot of calm into the space.
Zach, whereabouts are you?
I'm in Dundee, so not very evident from my accent, but moved up here a few years ago. You're London, right?
I was, now Manchester, probably back to London soon. But yeah, I think I went to a local Methodist church not too long, and probably the youngest person there is probably in their 60s. And I showed up with my do-rag, just sat at the back, and at the end of the service, the man that was doing the tech came up to us, come up, let's have a cup of tea, and we had a chat. And it was so, like you said, they feel a little bit vindicated about, oh yeah, this thing is still going. We're not the last generation, sort of. And I think I can only imagine that effect's also happening in Orthodox churches.
Yeah. Have you been to St. Aidan's in Manchester?
No, I haven't.
I'd recommend it. Pop along. They're nice people there. It's at the Antiochian Archdiocese.
Oh, okay.
I went once. It's nice.
So what have you? I've not been on a live stream with you before yet, Zach. So how did you find yourself into this little corner? You've got it sounds like a Anglican to Orthodoxy. Sounds like you had kind of a journey here over the past few years.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched a lot of PVK for far too much than is healthy, so I thought I'd better speak as well as just watch. What prompted me to kind of join the Discords and join live streams was listening to a lot of Jacob's conversations. I like engaging in Jacob's Discord and being around those conversations because I find them really interesting. Father Stephen DeYoung was a big kind of impact in me getting all the ideas in my head figured out to make the jump to Orthodoxy. So hearing all of his conversations with Jacob pulled me into this corner more.
I love hearing that because it's obviously PVK, but a bit of a unique path because Jacob's channel has a very unique vibe to it, which I love too, by the way. And quite frankly, Jacob has so much genius. He's the one who kicked off these live just chattings. I mean, he kicked this off, and has been a really amazing outgrowth of this little corner. So Jacob has, he's a rebel browser and he's ornery and he knows it, which is amazing. You know what I mean? He can rub people the wrong way, but man, he's done a lot for this little corner.
Yeah, I had like a 2-hour chat with him that there's a lot of saying, okay, I'm going to let that slide and we're going to just move on to the next thing. Over and over again. But as long as you get used to how to handle him, he's just lovely.
You had to love me. Daddy said so.
Exactly. I'll tell you what, I am amazed now. You had a background in Anglicanism, but you see someone like Gavin or whatever, and this is why I need to have an open mind, because this space is a very challenging space. If you're not really, I speak from this, for example, if you're not really strong in your faith, the sorts of people that will challenge you on certain things, like, for example, in terms of challenge you on your Christianity, right? Like there are some things that could really shake people, around a bit. And then, to some extent, if you're, let's say you come from a totally secular background and now you're finding your way and you think you want to explore Christianity, being exposed to, deep, hard things, and people are all over the board on it. Trying to get your head around that can be, it can be really, it can be really confusing. Sometimes there's some simplicity of just when Paul or Pedro say, go to church, which is, that's a simple thing. Like, just go to church. Like, what's the one closest to you? Just go to that church, and just start the simple, just get into it, because, for me, and, I've done that. I got challenged on, I mentioned earlier on a voice chat with Sherry and Luke, which really challenged kind of this thing that I've fallen into in terms of this thing. And that was good, right? That was good for me. But I also have a certain sense that I have this thing that I know is true. It's proven to be true in my life. So you're not going to knock me off that center. You may ask me some questions that put me into a space of, wow, I have no idea about this aspect of this thing, but it doesn't knock me off my core. So but yet we have folks like Gavin, and other sorts of folks who have found their way in and somehow have been able to come into these conversations and be challenged, very, watching people get very challenged, very hard on certain things and so on and so forth, yet they find their way. I find that amazing.
I'm not sure I've run into Gavin. Is that Gavin Ashenden or?
I don't know. I don't think he's definitely would have been on some conversations with Jacob over the years for sure. Grim Grizz a lot. I don't know if you spend time with Grim Grizz. There's some of that. He will broadcast live to himself on the Randos United channel too. So he's around.
I'll check him out.
Yeah, and he has an amazing story. He came in. He wasn't a believing Christian, but hanging around here for 2 or 3 years, and then all of a sudden now he and his wife and his kids are going to a church, which is a fascinating story.
Cool. Yeah, the just go to church thing is always something I want to reflect and broadcast, because it's exactly what was told to me when I, in my overly thinky talky mode, got convinced of the existence of God from reading an argument for the existence of God in a big long book. And then asked the guy that had the Catholic guy that had recommended this book to me. I sort of sat him down for lunch and went, I think I believe in God now. What do I do? And he didn't say, okay, well now you have to accept all the articles of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and I'm going to make you a Catholic now. He said, be authentic to something, follow that, and then you can self-correct to being authentic to the actual truth. You be authentic to something, then it sets you on the path. That's what I did.
Mm-hmm. And that's like, to some extent, I've always pushed back a little bit when people talk about this not being real life or whatever. We just have a new mom who found her husband through the Discord channels and stuff here. And so it is real life. But what I think a lot of these things have done, and you've seen it play out, is that conversations are had here. There is real life stuff going on. I've gone one-on-one with people offline in very personal conversations, but this allows people to have that space to, have conversations for meaning making or whatever they want to do. But then eventually you can go plug in right where you live. You can go, find a church or do a thing right in your community,
I haven't met any other people in Dundee on here.
Lance, my husband would like to clarify that I did not become a new mom through the Discord.
That is true. We need to be specific in our words. Absolutely. All right. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I was just going to pop on to hang with Luke, but a lot of folks there have been a long time, so I've been on. Sadly, I need to actually get some work done today. So
yeah, me too.
Wonderful to see you all. All right.
It's great seeing you again.